The chandelier is glowing, champagne trembles in crystal, her sister is smiling like a queen seconds away from coronation. Then the door opens and the most dangerous man in the city walks in, looks at the family and destroys the engagement with surgical calm. But the knife twists deeper later in the library when he turns to the daughter no one notices and offers her a marriage contract instead. In that moment, she is no longer the shadow in the room, she is the storm.
With the Whitmore family's calculated equation, she was the ghost variable, the overlooked daughter eclipsed by the manufactured radiance of her perfect sister. A critical failure was imminent, however, because the city's most powerful man had no interest in the asset presented by their contract. He sought her. The moment Adrian Volkov entered the sterile, luminous room and nullified her sister's engagement with 5 chilling words, Elena Whitmore's existence fractured into an outcome she could never have predicted. This is the analysis of the subject who remained invisible until one man's gaze finally found her. The champagne felt like a fabrication. With clinical observation, Elena watched the effervescence rise in the crystal. The Whitmore dining room was illuminated, a stage set for a small-scale coronation, because that is what it was. Her mother's design was flawless. White roses cascaded from silver urns, and every place setting's value surpassed an average person's annual income. Attendants moved between guests like highly disciplined apparitions. Her father proposed a toast to Victoria and Adrian, his glass held high. The voice of Richard Whitmore was saturated with the smugness of a man who had engineered a transaction far beyond his influence, to lineage, to influence, and to a future that will elevate the Whitmore legacy beyond anything we have imagined. Elena dissected her sister's smile. Victoria knew the precise angle to capture light and how to conjure moisture in her eyes without disturbing her cosmetics. It was a craft of calibrated perfection Elena had never acquired. A scent rippled around the table. 12 guests attired for a diplomatic affair, all complicit in the narrative that this was a union of hearts, not a corporate merger. Elena set aside her untouched champagne, reaching for her water. Elena, darling, at least feign participation in your sister's tactical achievement. Her mother's tone, when deployed for correction, held the sharpness of polished steel. Catherine Whitmore's smile was a mask for the reprimand, as optics were paramount, but her gaze promised a later confrontation. Of course, Mother. My congratulations, Victoria. Elena offered the small gesture with her water glass. Her sister did not register it. This was standard procedure. Elena ceased expecting acknowledgement around her 16th year, the year Victoria was launched into the social theater, and Elena accepted her role as the perpetual understudy in her own home. Not aesthetically pleasing enough, not socially adept enough, simply not enough by any metric to command the attention her sibling garnered by existing. Adrian is expected momentarily, Victoria stated, checking her device with a feigned nonchalance that betrayed a deep-seated need for validation. His arrival is confirmed. Champagne was replenished. An uncle initiated an anecdote about a powerful connection. A cousin's laughter was too loud. The entire event was a script Elena had witnessed too often. A production whose every line she detested. She had encountered Adrian Volkov only once, 3 months prior, at some charitable function. While Victoria had pursued him with methodical purpose, Elena had sought sanctuary in an alcove with a book, her usual defensive mechanism. He had found her there, seemingly by chance, also seeking refuge from the social performance. Their conversation lasted no more than 20 minutes. He bypassed the standard questions used to establish social hierarchies. Instead, he gestured to her book, a worn volume on landscape architecture, and inquired if her interest was genuine. or merely a defensive posture? Both, she conceded, and he laughed. It was an authentic laugh, not the courteous, fabricated sound common among men in their social stratum. They discussed green spaces in city planning, the political struggles over public park funding, and the way urban environments can erode the soul's need for beauty. It was the most authentic human exchange she had experienced in months. Then Victoria had materialized, a star, pulling all celestial bodies into her gravitational field. And Elena watched Adrian's expression harden into a guarded facade. Her sister linked her arm through his with proprietary ease, and Elena receded into the background, rendered invisible once more. She replayed that brief exchange with an irrational frequency, harboring no delusions about Adrian Volkov. The man was a known entity, a predator whose ruthlessness her family deemed an asset, believing it could be controlled through marriage. Yet for 20 minutes, someone had addressed her as an individual, as if her thoughts held weight. It was a pathetic foundation to build upon. Elena understood this, yet she was conditioned to subsist on the most minimal emotional sustenance. He has arrived. Victoria rose, adjusting her ivory gown, a piece of clothing worth more than a pre-owned vehicle. Is my appearance satisfactory? You are perfect, my love, her mother affirmed, which was accurate. Victoria's primary skill was her state of constant flawlessness. Elena detected movement in the corridor, male voices directing the staff. Her father stood, adjusting his tie, readying himself to receive the man who could dictate financial destinies with a single directive, the latest acquisition for his portfolio. The man who, according to rumor, associated with individuals so dangerous that others were afraid to speak his name. The dining room doors opened. Adrian Volkov did not merely enter a space, he colonized its atmosphere. He was tall, dark, and wore a suit that appeared to be an extension of his own body. It was not his appearance that controlled the room, however. It was his presence, an energy suggesting the room's very existence was contingent upon his approval, that he was bestowing a favor upon the moment rather than attending it. Adrian, my love, Victoria vocalized, advancing toward him with arms extended to receive her trophy. He halted a pace away, leaving her hand suspended in the space between them. His expression was a neutral mask, a quality that only intensified the abrupt chill. Victoria, his voice was entirely devoid of inflection. Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore, I am grateful for the invitation. Elena watched her father's expression of triumph begin to fracture. This was not the register of a man arriving to formalize his engagement. This was the execution of a different protocol entirely. Well, do come in. Don't simply stand there. Catherine indicated the vacant seat of honor next to Victoria. We have a great deal to discuss. I will not be staying. Adrian's statement landed in the room like projectiles striking placid water. I came to handle this in person, as it seemed appropriate, though it is an inconvenience. Elena registered a cold tightening in her stomach. She recognized that tone. It was the sound of a final, irrevocable decree. It was the voice of a man rendering a verdict from which no appeal could be made. Handle what precisely? Richard's professional facade was disintegrating. If this concerns the prenuptial articles, I assure you our legal counsel can. There will be no counsel. There will be no prenuptial. There will be no marriage. Adrian's gaze passed over the family with the detached curiosity of an engineer assessing a structure marked for demolition. I am terminating the engagement. Effective now, any understanding between our families is nullified. The ensuing silence was so absolute it seemed fragile enough to break. The color drained from Victoria's face, cycling through tones Elena had never seen on human skin. Her mother appeared as though she had been physically assaulted. Her father's expression twisted from bewilderment to rage in a single moment. "You cannot be serious." Richard's volume began to escalate before he suppressed it, striving for a veneer of composure. "Adrian, if some misunderstanding has occurred, I am confident we can resolve it. There is no misunderstanding. I have no intention of marrying your daughter. I never did." Adrian's words were delivered with a frankness that approached the cruel. "The arrangement was a proposition your family initiated. I allowed the discussion to persist longer than it ought to have. That was my error. I am correcting it now. How dare you?" Catherine's voice was a high-pitched sound of disbelief. "You have humiliated Victoria before our entire family. You made promises, public gestures. I have made no public declarations about marriage. Any announcements your family elected to circulate were premature, if not outright fabrications." He finally directed his gaze to Victoria, who was frozen, her social algorithms apparently having crashed. "You are a visually appealing and competent woman. I have no doubt you will secure a more fitting partner, but that partner will not be me." Victoria's lips separated, but no sound emerged. Elena had never witnessed her sister without a prepared response, never seen her social magnetism fail so catastrophically. The display was disquieting. Despite a lifetime of being marginalized, Elena experienced a sudden, acute pang of empathy. "This is unacceptable." Richard moved toward Adrian, as if to physically obstruct his departure. "Do you comprehend the consequences this will have for Victoria's reputation, for our family's standing?" "Yes." Adrian was unmoved. "But that is not my concern. Your family interpreted a preliminary conversation as a binding contract. That was your decision. I am now making mine." "You arrogant," Richard began, but Adrian silenced him with one look, an unspoken threat that caused her father to recoil. "I would strongly recommend you do not complete that statement." The civility vanished from Adrian's voice, replaced by an arctic void. His statement was a velvet-wrapped menace, illustrating a clear vision of their downfall, of every shameful family secret exposed to public view. The blood fled Richard's face, leaving it a waxy, stunned mask. Yet Catherine, a veteran of social combat, recovered immediately, her countermove a monetary figure intended to erase the incident. Adrian dismissed it like a puff of smoke. His analytical gaze surveyed the room and for a terrifying instant locked onto Elena. The justification he announced was a defect in the arrangement's core. Victoria desired a status symbol, a function he would not fulfill. "Betrayal," Victoria breathed, the word fracturing as it escaped her lips. Here, the edifice of Victoria's composure disintegrates, revealing the raw architecture of her pain. "You said I was everything you admired." Adrian's response is a scalpel, wielded with surgical precision. "I said you were accomplished." He performs a linguistic dissection, severing admiration from affection, leaving her emotionally exsanguinated. Elena bears witness to her sister's universe turning to ash. A tremor of rage enters Richard's voice. "Get out of my house." Adrian pivots, but his pause at the door is a perfectly orchestrated rest in a cruel symphony. "Actually, there is one more thing." Catherine's warning is a hiss. "You've done enough." He offers no acknowledgement. His focus shifts, his gaze locking onto Elena, making her a captive audience. "I'd like to speak with your younger daughter, Privately, the atmosphere is instantly suffocated. Every gaze in the room pivots to Elena. Upon her mother's face, a tempest of emotions unfolds. Confusion gives way to suspicion, cresting in a wave of horror. Victoria's expression contorts into something novel and monstrous, a pure fury directed at her own sister. Absolutely not! Richard inserts himself between them, a bastion of paternal rage. You've insulted one daughter. You are not getting near the other. Adrian offers the scene minimal recognition. I am merely asking for a conversation. A silent ultimatum permeates the room. 10 minutes of her attention, or his departure is final. Every survival instinct commands Elena to retreat, to vanish into the background. But something in his unwavering stare holds her in place. Elena, do not, her mother insists, and yet a small alien voice escapes Elena's own throat. It's fine. I'll talk to him. A strangled sound escapes Victoria. You can't be serious, Elena. It's just a conversation, Elena reiterates, the words forming a flimsy armor. She rises, her form trembling but resolute, an insurrection warring with a history of submission. After 24 years of acquiescence, this singular choice represents a tectonic shift in her personal timeline. The library, she directs him. As she exits, the collective weight of their silent condemnation presses down like a physical force. The once familiar hallway seems to elongate before her. The heavy oak portal of the library now appears as the threshold to her own destiny. He follows. The latch clicking shut is the sound of a key turning on her former existence. She is now enclosed by leather-bound falsehoods. These unread tomes represent a cosmos apart from the handful of worn paperbacks she holds dear. She pivots, arms crossed in a posture of fragile defense. I assume you didn't detonate my family's life to discuss garden design. The faintest hint of a smile graces his lips. No, though that was a pleasant talk. You remember it? I remember most things that matter. His gaze is an inventory, assessing everything. You cut your hair. Her hand instinctively finds the shorn strands, a clandestine rebellion now exposed. I needed a change. It suits you better, he remarks, the compliment landing with an unforeseen gravity. He closes the distance by a step. This isn't a game, he states, not revenge nor a whim. Okay, she breathes, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. What? And then the proposition is presented, articulated with the stark precision of a corporate takeover, a marriage contract. 12 months, unambiguous terms, financial remuneration, a clean severance, her function to perform the role of his wife in public, her compensation, a purchased and paid for independence. A wild, sharp laugh escapes her. You're insane. Perhaps, he concedes, his features a mask. But I am serious. This is not a proposal, it is a finely crafted weapon, the final twisting turn of the blade. That's the most hateful thing I've ever heard. It's not about them, it's about you. He contrasts Victoria's artifice with Elena's authenticity, the sole genuine element he had witnessed. We spoke for 20 minutes about parks, he says, presenting it as empirical data. The best 20 minutes of that night. He outlines his spousal requirements like a general mapping a campaign, a strategic asset for business, for appearances. He requires a partner in the public sphere, not the private one. The room's equilibrium seems to falter around Elena. And you chose me for this because we had one normal conversation. I chose you, he counters, his logic a cold instrument, because you don't want anything from me. he depicts a desolate landscape where every interaction is a negotiation. In her very apathy, he perceives a stark, unvarnished honesty. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard. Probably, he agrees, but it doesn't make it any less true. I'm offering you an exit, Elena. A contractual escape, he clarifies. From this residence, from her relations, from the asphyxiating invisibility of her existence. He restates the terms. 1 year of performance in exchange for the capital to construct a life of her own. The word freedom resonates in the quiet architecture of her heart. This is crazy, she whispers, the statement lacking its former conviction. He asks only for her consideration, promising a contract with its own termination clause. She bypasses his reasoning. But why me? He meets her gaze for a sustained moment. Because you looked at me as if I were boring, not dangerous. He elaborates that all others view him as a binary choice, a menace or a prize. A small, disbelieving laugh breaks from her. I was just being polite. Exactly. He proffers a business card, a formal summons to a ludicrous proposition. My private number, think it over. She accepts it. The substantial, crisp cardstock feels concrete in her trembling palm. Her conscious mind registers the scenario as madness, but a deeper current within her recognizes it as a doorway. This is an egress. Her life has been a gilded enclosure, her aspirations starved. This unhinged contract is a potential key. A fundamental shift within her is palpable. If I did this, what would you tell everyone? Why me and not Victoria? His reply is immediate and merciless. The truth that I chose someone real over a performance. He observes her, his gaze analytical, as if witnessing the internal mechanics of her thoughts. He acknowledges the inevitable consequence, the family's fury, society's censure, as a simple, unfortunate variable. Your life holds no comfort now, he notes, a bitterness in his tone that seems to catch him off guard. He frames the choice as a wager where she has already lost everything. He steps back toward the door. His directives are clear: review the contract, call with inquiries, or incinerate the card. At the threshold, he pauses. You've been a ghost for too long, Elena. It's time for a change. And then he is gone, leaving her at the precipice. The door swings open once more. It is Victoria, her eyes incandescent. What did he want? Elena conceals the card. Nothing, she lies. He just apologized for the scene. Her denial is a faint murmur against the storm of Victoria's charge. Her sister closes in, rage contorting her lovely features into something grotesque. She pronounces Adrian Voloff a man who never expresses remorse, a man who never operates without a motive, demanding to know his true objective. As Elena attempts to deflect, Victoria's self-control fractures into hysteria, a deluge of her own anxieties redirected at her sister. She cries out about a jealousy that has corroded their lives, of a calculated scheme to orchestrate her downfall. A vast soul-level exhaustion settles over Elena, the fatigue of an actor confined to a dreadful, looping drama. She refutes it all, stating she hardly knew him. Victoria insists, her voice sharp, asking why he would then have selected Elena. Her fists are clenched, white-knuckled indicators of an imminent explosion. Then the poison comes, the familiar words designed to inflict injury. Branding Elena the invisible daughter was a specter meant for silence and obscurity. Yet the barb that once drew blood now failed to penetrate. In her pocket, the weight of the card is a new center of gravity, a choice that has reconfigured her universe. "You're not wrong," she affirms, her voice a startling point of stillness. "I have been invisible. I think I've decided I don't want to be anymore." She moves past her sister, departing the library and traversing the hall where the echoes of conflict still resonate. She ascends the rear staircase to her room, a third-floor cell with just enough area for a bed and desk, a space for someone intended to occupy no space, and examines Adrienne's card. It is brutally elemental, black ink on heavy stock, a phone number that is not merely a number, but a junction between this reality and another. 1 year. Freedom. Beyond her door, she can hear her mother's fury and her father's vain efforts to manage the fallout. The house itself seems to vibrate with the aftershock of Adrienne's maneuver. Yet for the first time, the turmoil cannot reach her. Elena feels herself hovering above the wreckage of her family, observing it with clarity rather than drowning within it. Her thoughts turn to a book on landscape architecture, on forging gardens from industrial blight, spaces that exist only because someone asserted their right to be beautiful. A concept takes root. Perhaps she could become her own reclaimed territory, a life she must champion. Elena gazes at the number on the card in her palm. To call it this moment would represent a clean schism, a desperate gambit before fear could take hold and immobilize her. The alternate route was to await the contract, to behave like a rational person. But rationality had been her confinement, the very logic that kept her in a tiny room within a family that barely perceived her. Her thumb pauses over the screen. Then she lowers the phone, turning instead to her laptop. A move of this magnitude requires intelligence. She had to understand who Adrienne Volov was beneath the public image, to comprehend the world she was considering entering, to learn what boundaries were absolute. She commits 3 hours to the investigation. By its conclusion, she possesses a much sharper image of the man offering her an escape, and none of it offers comfort. Adrian Volkov's empire was forged from ruthless strategy and perfectly calculated risk. Those who opposed him encountered repercussions that were immaculate by legal standards, yet ruinous on a personal level. He moved within the law's shadow, a figure who grasped that legality and justice are not synonymous. His power to orchestrate devastation was not mere speculation. It was a verifiable truth for those with the knowledge to find it. This reality would have instilled terror in most. For Elena, however, it brought a sensation akin to relief. The rationale was stark and precise. A man of such formidable danger could guarantee his commitments. If she was merely exchanging one form of captivity for another, this new confinement offered both a termination date and a final reward. At midnight, her phone illuminated with a message from an anonymous sender bearing a PDF file. The subject line read simply, "Contract for review." Elena initiated the download and began to examine its contents. 27 pages of dense legalese forced her into constant research, yet the essential terms were savagely direct. 12 months commencing on the date of their union. The agreement specified a cohabited residence with separate sleeping quarters, mandated their presence at social and business events, and insisted upon complete financial candor from both parties. The figure cited for her compensation caused Elena's hand to tremble. It also outlined the conditions for termination due to breach, a no-fault dissolution at 6 months with mutual consent, and non-disclosure clauses forged with the strength of steel. It was the most deeply personal and yet utterly detached document she had ever encountered. A brief note was appended at the end. "My legal counsel is at your disposal. You're welcome to engage your own. Take whatever time you require. A V." Elena parsed the entire document 3 additional times, marking clauses, hunting for the concealed snare she was certain existed. An escape of this magnitude, she reasoned, invariably carried an unstated cost. Yet the conditions were surprisingly equitable, almost defensive, suggesting that Adrian's stated desire for a partner, not a pawn, might hold some truth. At 2 a.m, Elena registered the sound of creaking floorboards just outside her room. A gentle knock, then her mother's voice, stripped of all affection. "Elena, we must speak." Elena remained perfectly still. Following a prolonged quiet, the footsteps receded. They would return. The following day promised a grueling series of family confrontations, of penance and blame. Victoria would assume the role of the wronged party. Her parents would brandish guilt and duty as their preferred instruments. The entire familial apparatus would mobilize to herd Elena back into her designated silent confinement. But for this single night, isolated in her room with the contract's glow illuminating her screen, Elena possessed something they could not seize. She possessed a choice. At first light, Elena prepared coffee before the household stirred. Seated in the breakfast alcove that looked out upon the garden, she observed the light spreading across lawns maintained by 3 gardeners, her father's monuments to status, her mother's evidence of achievement. These symbols held no meaning for her. She took out her phone, composing a text to the number on Adrian's card. "I have inquiries regarding the contract. When might we confer?" The answer arrived within 30 seconds. "My office, 2 p.m. today. The address will follow." Elena drank the last of her coffee and returned to her room. She assembled a single valise, not with all her belongings, but with the items that held significance. A photograph of her grandmother, who passed away when Elena was 12, the last individual to have ever truly seen her. A selection of books, her laptop, and attire her mother had not chosen. She was uncertain if she would require the bag, but the act of packing it felt like a silent oath. At 8, her mother knocked once more with greater force. "Elena Whitmore, you will open this door immediately." Elena complied. Catherine was there, impeccably attired, her makeup a perfect facade, her emotional defenses firmly in place. "We must address the events of last night." "There is nothing to address. Adrian terminated his engagement to Victoria. That is of no concern to me." "Do not feign innocence. It is a most unbecoming guise for you." Catherine moved past her, entering the room, her gaze fixing on the bag placed upon the bed. "What is the purpose of that?" "It is nothing." "You are not departing to anywhere." Her mother's expression became glacial. "Whatever small delusion you are constructing about last night has concluded. This family faces a crisis because of that man's actions. You will not compound it with some juvenile display." "I am 24. I can do as I please." "You are 24, with no financial resources, no career prospects, and no comprehension of how the world truly functions." Catherine positioned herself on the bed's edge as if it were a seat of power. "You believe you are a captive here? By all means, attempt to survive independently. Let us observe how long your little insurrection endures when you cannot meet your rent." This was the very trap Elena had sensed tightening around her for years. The cold, unyielding reality that liberty demanded a price she was unable to pay. The income she generated was insufficient for survival. Her academic degree was worthless. Her entire professional history consisted of positions her father had secured for her. Even before Adriana Voloff emerged as the catalyst, Elena was already exhibiting signs of withering within her familial ecosystem. A contract that offered capital became the incendiary spark for a personal revolution. Her quiet declaration, "I'll be fine," was a falsehood she told even herself, a sentiment her mother, Catherine, instantly dismantled, forecasting complete disaster. Catherine's directive to disregard the man was a final, desperate gambit to maintain authority, portraying Adrian as a predator in a contest far too sophisticated for Elena. Following their confrontation, the psychological pressure grew immense. Her existence felt like a gradual asphyxiation. The decision to depart, stepping out at 1:30 in a dress appropriated from her sister, Victoria, represented the definitive rupture of her lifelong submission, an overt declaration of war against her own blood. The office Adrian occupied was a monument to subdued menace, an architecture of glass and steel that proclaimed its vast, controlled power. Within its chambers, a sterile silence magnified the unspoken intimidation. After a scan verified her identity, a solitary elevator sealed her inside for the journey upward, a 40-story ascent designed to amplify his strategic advantage. At the apex, she was guided into a space offering a conqueror's panorama of the city. There, Adrian was concluding a call in Russian, another casual exhibition of his global influence. He permitted the silence to linger before acknowledging her presence, motioning toward the contracts on the table. "You came," he observed, a subtle probe of her resolve. Her response, "I have questions," marked the first quiet act of resistance within his meticulously orchestrated domain. What transpired next was the mere specter of a negotiation. Elena, referencing her notes, began with Clause 7, subsection 3, an ambiguous requirement regarding social functions. Over the next hour, she observed a surgical deconstruction of the agreement. Adriana's approach was one of unmitigated candor. He addressed every query, even including his lawyer via video link to decipher the esoteric language of the law. It was a calculated performance intended to construct a tenuous facade of collaboration and trust. His proposal to finance her independent legal counsel was a masterstroke, reinforcing the carefully crafted illusion. By its conclusion, she possessed 12 pages of notes and a depleted mind. Her final question, aimed directly at his underlying motives, tore through the veneer of their brief, civilized interaction. In response, Adrian presented a narrative of deliberate isolation. He characterized his life as a fortress, constructed piece by piece for maximum benefit, a confession of a bloodless, utilitarian existence. He then depicted her as an elegant anomaly in his system, an individual who wasn't calculating back. Her unvarnished honesty was, in his view, a refreshing interaction. This was a textbook reframing by the megalomaniac. His emotional vacancy was not a character defect, but a burden he carried, and she was the unexpected remedy. Elena identified it as simple loneliness. He conceded the point, then immediately reclaimed his dominant position. Lonely with resources is superior. He pivoted back to the contract, terming it a business arrangement. Her exit strategy from a life he had accurately assessed was suffocating her. He had observed her at the family dinner, he explained, and diagnosed her condition as drowning, with his contract being the life raft. Its provisions were severe. 12 months of mutual exploitation succeeded by an immaculate separation. A conflict erupted within Elena's thoughts as she visualized the consequences, the ostracism from her family, the public humiliation. Adrian did not attempt to refute these outcomes, he validated them. It will be uncomfortable and complicated, he conceded, framing the ordeal as the transactional cost of her financial sovereignty. This represents a pivotal moment in the formation of a captive's bond, where the incarcerator offers a perilous escape from an older, more profound imprisonment, weighing his proposition against a slow demise into invisibility. She selected the devil she did not know. I require one alteration to the contract. Her voice was unwavering. He inquired, "Which one?" Clause 17, the article concerning termination. It must state that should either party develop authentic romantic sentiments, the agreement is immediately rendered void without financial penalty, circumventing the 6-month waiting period. A brief expression, something resembling surprise, animated Adrian's features. Do you perceive that as a probable hazard? I perceive it as planning for all eventualities. Elena maintained his stare, her spine a column of steel. This arrangement functions only if we both maintain clarity on its nature. The instant that changes, it concludes. Is that clear? He contemplated this for a considerable moment before delivering a crisp, decisive nod. Understood. I will instruct my lawyer to append the clause. I will then require 24 hours for my own attorney to examine the finalized document. Elena rose, feeling a sudden compulsion for movement, as if to test the very limits of her new liberty to depart. If it is satisfactory, I will sign. If not, this conversation never occurred. She retrieved her bag, noting that her hands were completely steady. Regardless of the outcome, my decision will be known by Friday. Rising to his feet, Adrian extended his hand, a gesture signaling the conversation's end. Friday, she affirmed. Elena accepted his hand. The grip was firm yet unpossessing. For a moment, they were suspended in time, two figures confronting a future that defied logic but felt orchestrated by fate. May I inquire about something? She asked, turning to depart. Certainly. Why not simply inform Victoria of the truth initially? That you held no interest? A faint, humorless smile formed on Adrian's lips. Because her question was never about my desires. It was about what I could provide her, a critical distinction. Elena stepped from the building into the afternoon glare, her bag on her shoulder, her phone vibrating with frantic messages from her mother. The metropolis pulsed around her, a creature of a million separate realities. She was seized by both dread and an exhilarating sense of liberation. By Friday, a choice had to be made: to suffocate in the life that was destroying her, or to plunge into the unknown with a man who offered a lesson in survival. Elena moved without a target, needing only the sensation of pavement passing underfoot. In the space between that office and her eventual destination, she understood the decision was already made. It had been sealed when she first packed her bag. The attorney she retained, Martha Castellano, was a $300 an hour phenomenon. She possessed gray hair in a bun, sharp enough to seem weaponized, reading glasses on a silver lanyard, and a gaze that had witnessed every shade of human fallibility. This is either the most brilliant maneuver you've ever conceived or the most self-destructive, Martha pronounced, placing the contract aside after a 2-hour dissection. I cannot yet discern which. Elena was seated opposite her in a room that smelled of old paper and potent coffee. That is hardly comforting. It is not intended to be. You are entering a monetized marriage with a man you barely know, one with a termination date. Nothing in this situation should evoke a sense of comfort. Martha gestured to a flagged section. That being said, the document itself is remarkably robust. Its author attempted to safeguard you both a rarity. Typically, these are snares. So you advise me to sign. I advise you to comprehend what you are signing. Martha slid a legal pad covered in notations toward her. The financial arrangement is substantial yet equitable. The escape clauses offer numerous paths for exit should circumstances deteriorate. The confidentiality agreements protect you as much as they do him. However, Elena, this remains an immense gamble. You are legally binding yourself to an individual with a reputation for corporate ruthlessness. Should he choose to violate this contract, you possess legal remedies. But legal remedies do not mend psychological trauma. For 3 days, Elena had been consumed by this solitary decision. 3 days of ignoring her family's desperate calls, sleeping on her friend Maya's sofa, attempting to envision a future that did not feel like an impending crisis. What would you do in my position? A subtle, knowing smile touched Martha's lips. I would measure what I am fleeing from against what I am running toward. If the entity you escape is more damaging than the risk before you, you are making an error. But if you are moving toward something greater than what you forsake, then perhaps the risk is justified. That's a rather philosophical perspective for a legal professional. I am a person of considerable complexity. Martha pushed the document over a polished wood surface. From a professional standpoint, I find this agreement unassailable, with terms as advantageous as one might expect. On a personal level, I observe more vitality in your eyes discussing this extreme plan than I have in a very long time. Interpret that as you see fit. That afternoon, within the quiet confines of Martha's office, Elena fixed her signature to the contract, her name appearing alien and insignificant on the line. With Martha as a witness, copies were generated and filings were notarized. The procedure lasted 20 minutes. It reconfigured her entire existence. One final point, Martha mentioned as Elena prepared to go. That provision regarding romantic involvement nullifying the agreement. It's ingenious, but exercise caution. The boundary between performing a role and embodying it can become indistinct. Do not delude yourself about your true position. The caution settled like a weight in Elena's stomach during the drive back to Maya's residence. Her phone was a monument to unanswered appeals. 17 missed calls from her mother, 9 from Victoria, and a single call from her father she recognized as a veiled ultimatum. She dismissed them all, dispatching one text to Adrian. The contract is signed. What is the next step? The reply came instantly. We formalize it tomorrow, 10 a.m., City Hall. Bring identification and the contract. I will manage the remainder. Elena gazed at the text. Tomorrow. In fewer than 24 hours, she would be married to a man she had met twice. The sheer absurdity of it should have made her flee. Instead, the feeling was something alarmingly akin to relief. Maya discovered her on the apartment's small balcony, observing the flow of traffic below. You appear to be deciding between vomiting or jumping. I would prefer you did neither. I signed it. Elena displayed the phone. We're proceeding tomorrow. God. Maya collapsed into the other plastic chair, which protested audibly. Right. Fine. This is proceeding. Do you have appropriate attire? You can't be wet in denim. It is merely a procedural steps. It is not a genuine wedding. It is genuine enough to bind you in the eyes of the law. You will wear something respectable. Maya was already standing, a commander seizing control of a new front. Let's go, we are going shopping. Maya, I lack the funds for my gift. View it as a wedding present for the most audacious choice of your life. She pulled Elena upright. Furthermore, if you are to do this, you will do it properly. You will enter that municipal building looking as if you chose this path, not as if you are being marched to your execution. They discovered a dress in a small shop Maya frequented, a straightforward cream sheath that appeared deliberate. When the sales associate inquired if it was for a memorable event, Maya declared a courthouse ceremony with such conviction that the woman presented them with champagne, which they both declined. Back at the apartment, Elena tried on the dress again, scrutinizing her image in Maya's mirror. She appeared as someone portraying a woman whose existence was not her own. Or perhaps for the first time, she resembled someone stepping into an existence that was finally hers. "You are certain of this?" Maya inquired, her silhouette framing the doorway. "Because you can still retract. You could remain here, find employment, construct an alternative life. Marrying a stranger is not your sole means of escaping your family." "I am not merely escaping them. I am purchasing the time to discover my identity apart from them." Elena pivoted from the mirror. 12 months. That is the full term. A year to breathe and sufficient funds at the conclusion to begin anew. And if this entire endeavor collapses, at least I attempted something, rather than just slowly expiring in that house for the remainder of my days. Elena fell onto the bed, overcome by a sudden surge of weariness. "I am so weary of being unseen, Maya. Weary of being the daughter they never desired, the sister they overlooked. This is madness, but it is my madness. I am selecting it. That must hold some value." Maya settled beside her, their shoulders making contact. A familiar solace from their university years when Elena was the reserved one and Maya was the dynamic personality who had simply decreed their friendship into being. The arrangement is finalized with guarantees of mutual protection established. A caution is issued regarding the subject, Adrian, and the disorienting influence of power. Subject Elena subsequently experienced a period of acute insomnia, her thoughts caught in a cycle of catastrophic scenarios stemming from the new contract. By sunrise, she had conceived of more than 30 ways it could fail, yet harbored no remorse for her decision. At 900 hours, she dressed in the specified cream attire and applied cosmetics to construct a veneer of composure. The resulting appearance was a delicate negotiation between poised self-control and exposed nerves. At 9:30, a text from Adrian served as a summons. Following a strained embrace with her friend, Elena descended to a waiting car, an unmarked premium sedan. A chauffeur admitted her to the passenger area, a space appointed with materials worth more than her total possessions. The journey to the municipal building took 15 minutes. Through the vehicle's polarized windows, the city dissolved into a fluid motion, a visual parallel to Elena's struggle to solidify the concept of her legal merger with Adrian Volkov. He was already present upon her arrival, a static figure on the building's steps, whose formidable presence was amplified by a dark suit. A momentary fracture in his mask of placid control, some unreadable emotion, flickered across his face as she emerged. He delivered a generic compliment on her attire, yet it carried an engineered weight. Elena reciprocated the hollow pleasantry, positioning herself beside him and clutching her handbag as if it were a mooring. When she admitted to a profound sense of anxiety, he reframed her fear as a symptom of lucid perception before leading her inside. He articulated the mechanics of their 10-minute proceeding, vows, signatures, filing, underscoring its purely transactional nature. He proceeded into the building, and she followed in his wake. The officiant, a woman in her 50s, conducted the proceedings with a professional fatigue cultivated from presiding over innumerable similar rituals. After verifying their identities and paperwork, she guided them into a small chamber, humming under fluorescent lights. She inquired about rings with an air of already knowing the answer. Adrian confirmed their absence. The clerk then presented a laminated card inscribed with standardized vows, noting its 5-minute duration and offering a space for personal statements, a proposition they jointly declined with a single silent look. They were instructed to face one another as the clerk commenced a monotone recitation of legal text. Elena felt a sense of dissociation, the words dissolving into a distant drone as her focus shifted to the sheer unreality of the room and the catastrophic, life-altering contract she was forging with a virtual stranger. "Do you, Adrian Volkov, take this woman as your lawfully wedded wife?" the clerk inquired. His response, "I do," resonated with the finality of a corporate deal being sealed. The query then shifted to her. "Do you, Elena Whitmore, take this man as your lawfully wedded husband?" In this moment lay her final opportunity for retreat. A wave of panic seized her, yet the words, "I do," escaped her lips, marking a point of irreversible commitment. A document materialized. They both signed, his signature a decisive slash of ink, hers a delicate, trembling script. With the clerk's own signature, the transaction was complete. "Congratulations, you are legally married," she stated, already moving them along for the subsequent appointment. They emerged into the daylight in silence, the certificate in Elena's hand feeling less like a celebration and more like a sentence. She was now legally bound to Adrian Volkov. The entire audacious maneuver concluded in less time than a grocery run. On the steps of the courthouse, Adrian pivoted, his words a sequence of directives. A car was assigned to transport her to his residence, where an assistant would greet her. A mandatory meeting at 1200 hours precluded his accompaniment, but he would convene with her that evening to review arrangements. Elena's voice was a whisper. "You're leaving?" He simply reiterated his schedule, delegating her to his subordinate Marcus. His phone was already in his hand, his attention captured by a screen of appointments. He offered the assurance that the staff was expecting her, then turned towards his own vehicle, leaving her with the marriage license. A newly processed asset in an impeccably efficient system. His name, a faint utterance on her lips, was just enough to halt him. He paused, his hand resting on the car door. "This isn't normal," she articulated. The faintest hint of a smile touched his mouth. "We entered into an agreement on terms that were not normal, until this evening." With that, he was gone, his vehicle absorbed back into the city's traffic flow. Elena was left in the charge of a man named Marcus, a formidable wall of quiet muscle who held open a car door. "Mrs. Volkov," he addressed her. The name was an alien construct, a label freshly affixed to her being. 24 years as Elena Whitmore, nullified by a 5-minute transaction. The 40-minute journey transitioned them from the urban core to a secluded, affluent enclave. They proceeded through private gates toward a structure of glass and stone, a monument to calculated power. Marcus offered his first unsolicited comment. Mr. Volkov designed it himself. Elena recognized the architecture from publications. It was an aesthetic of clean lines and opulent materials, a stark contrast to the fabricated history of her own family's estate. This residence offered no pretense about its wealth. As Marcus navigated into a circular driveway, a poised and severe woman in her 60s stood waiting, projecting an aura of someone who managed empires. "Mrs. Volkov," the woman said as Elena alighted, "I am Sarah Chen, the house manager. Welcome." Her steps created sharp echoes on the polished floors as she led Elena indoors. The interior revealed a vast, minimalist expanse defined by soaring ceilings and severe intentional art. Sarah commenced a tour of the main level, the kitchen, the dining room, the library, and Adrian's office, a space, Elena was informed, that was strictly forbidden. Sarah outlined the geography of the second floor. Elena's suite occupied the east wing, while Adrian's was in the west, establishing two distinct dominions under a single roof. A gym and a pool were also located there. Ascending a floating staircase, Sarah opened the door to Elena's designated quarters. The room was immense, easily 3 times the area of her former bedroom, featuring a glass wall and starkly elegant furnishings. The bathroom was an exercise in marble and chrome, while the walk-in closet surpassed the square footage of some city apartments. Sarah noted that while Elena's personal effects were in transit, Mr. Volkov had already made provisions for her. A closet was pre-stocked with a foundational wardrobe in her size. Toiletries were meticulously arranged. "Should you find yourself in need of anything else," Sarah finished, "it will be procured." Gazing out the window at the immaculately landscaped grounds, Elena exhaled. "This is overwhelming." "Yes, I would imagine so." Sarah's tone was neutral, devoid of either compassion or cruelty. "Mr. Volkov outlined the conditions of your arrangement. I have been in his employ for 8 years. He is a demanding man, but he is equitable. Adhere to the rules, respect his privacy, and you will encounter no difficulties." "What are the rules?" "You are not to enter his office. You are not to discuss his business with anyone. You are not to make social arrangements for him. Your rooms are your private domain. The common areas are to be maintained. Dinner is served at 7 when he is present, though your attendance is not compulsory outside of social obligations. The staff consists of myself, Marcus, a chef, a housekeeper, and a gardener. Our loyalty is to Adrian. Do you have any questions?" Elena possessed 1,000, but none this woman was equipped to answer. "When do I meet the staff?" "On an as-needed basis. We are here to provide assistance, not to be a presence." With that, Sarah turned to depart. "Please make yourself comfortable. The intercom is situated by the door if you require my assistance. Dinner is served at 7, either with Adrian or in your suite." After Sarah's departure, the silence within the immense room felt oppressive. Her phone then illuminated with 17 messages from her family, their agitated words assailing her. The last was from her father, an order to return home at once, addressing her as if she were a disobedient youth. With a detached sense of finality, she sent a text to her mother. "I am not returning. I am married. Do not make contact again," before powering down the device. The hours that ensued were steeped in a profound and empty quietude. Elena unpacked the small collection of boxes from her former existence, feeling like an interloper in the lavish chamber. The wardrobe contained a curated selection of clothing in her size, understated, high-quality items. In the bathroom, she discovered her favored brand of toiletries, a disturbingly personal detail that felt simultaneously thoughtful and invasive. At 6:30, she confronted the wardrobe, deliberating on her attire for dinner with her new husband. Every option seemed inappropriate, too informal, too elaborate, too much. She settled on dark jeans and a cashmere sweater, an armor of normality for the evening ahead, and descended the stairs feeling like a trespasser. Adrian was in the kitchen speaking with the chef, his tie absent, his sleeves rolled up. This casual iteration of him was, in a way, more formidable. "You located the room," he observed, presenting a fact rather than asking a question. "Sarah is exceptionally thorough." Elena remained near the doorway, uncertain of her place. He indicated the dining table, which was already prepared for two. "Don't hover. Sit." He informed her that the chef, Thomas, was a 5-year veteran who was deeply invested in his craft, so she should feign enjoyment. Thomas offered a terse smile before disappearing. Elena took her seat, observing as Adrian served her plate before his own, in a strange pantomime of domesticity that unsettled her stomach. "Describe your afternoon," Adrian prompted, dissecting his fish with surgical precision. "Strange, disorienting. I deactivated my phone. My family was becoming an issue." She moved the food on her plate. "And your meeting?" "It was productive." He consumed his meal with a disturbing efficiency as though it were merely sustenance. "Your family's campaign against this will intensify. They will eventually appear here or devise other methods of contact. Your response is your own prerogative. I will not intervene unless you request it. Their reaction to our marriage will be severe. Their reaction to my termination of the engagement with Victoria was already severe. This is merely the subsequent phase." Adrian placed his fork down, his gaze meeting hers directly. "You must internalize this, Elena. Your family will deploy every psychological weapon at their disposal: guilt, obligation, financial leverage, public humiliation. They will claim I am controlling you, that you are self-destructing. Some of their assertions may even contain truth, but the contract you executed grants you agency. Do not allow them to make you forget that." Elena managed to swallow a piece of salmon, its exquisite taste entirely lost on her. "Why are you taking a supportive stance on this? You could simply command me to manage it." "I could, but we are obligated to cohabitate for the next 12 months. Your sustained unhappiness would be inefficient." He then resumed his meal. Here we see the foundational rules of a union structured not as a marriage, but a merger. Notice how the inquiry into family, a standard relational overture, is met with a contractual barricade. An invisible wall, Section 12, descends over Adrian's features. The emotional climate shifts instantly, a chill that forces Elena's retreat. An apology is tendered, but the fragile rapport is shattered. Adrian then pivots to logistics, outlining the couple's first public appearance. A charity ball, black tie, is presented not as a social occasion, but as a mandatory business function. His language is clinical, detailing her required presence and the mandatory performance of contentment. "Can you manage that?" is a query about capability, not feeling. Her affirmative reply, "I can perform happiness," confirms her understanding of the role. His approval is followed by operational details. An assistant will provide a full briefing on attire and key personnel. The event is a necessary evil. A transactional performance where even boredom must be concealed. Elena's response, frosted with irony, affirms she will not be a liability, accepting her status as an asset. Adrian's reaction here, a narrowing of the eyes, is a micro-expression of dissent against her terminology. He contests the word purchased, substituting it with deal, a crucial reframing that preserves his sense of ethical control. But Elena's counterpoint lays bare the subtext. She is an asset acquired for a specific performance. The deliberate final placement of his silverware signifies the end of this debate. His assertion that she will be an asset is both a prediction and a directive, coupled with a caution against inventing slights, a dismissal of her emotional interpretation. The flush in Elena's cheeks signifies a retreat. She concedes the point. The admission that this is all just a lot is met with a moment of softened logic from Adrian. This was always the arrangement, he states, framing the current tension as a predictable initial difficulty. The remainder of the meal is filled with the empty architecture of conversation between strangers, a negotiation of shared space by two cohabitants, which is precisely what their contract dictates. The call to Maya serves as a field report, a status check from an agent deep in a high-stakes assignment, confirming she is operational, but probing the necessity of the exit plan. The initial assessment of the environment is one of overwhelming scale. The house is obscene, the staff efficient. The dinner is described as a study in deafening silence, a profound vacuum of connection with the stranger she now calls her husband. Here, Elena articulates the psychological state of her new reality. It is an abnormal situation. Her self-assessment is that of managed survival, with a caveat for the future performance at the gala, where she must embody the blissful wife. Maya's advice to channel Victoria is a tactical suggestion to adopt a pre-existing persona for the performance ahead, a troubling but potentially effective strategy. The humorless laugh from Elena is a classic sign of stress, a release of tension at the absurdity of her circumstances. Her longing for normal is countered by Maya's pragmatism. Normal was a failing enterprise. This new course, while abnormal, represents a strategic pivot. The demand for daily check-ins underscores the perceived risk of the operation. Alone, Elena is left to rationalize her choices, shifting her mindset from mere survival to long-term strategy. Yet for tonight, she is adrift, small, anxious, and psychologically homeless. The intrusion of sunlight serves as a harsh awakening to the new, unchangeable reality. She is married and relocated into the sphere of Adrian Volkov. Her previous existence has been, in her mind, surgically excised. The phone becomes a conduit to that severed past, with its 43 missed calls and 62 messages. The communications from her family chronicle a dramatic arc from concern to fury. 3 messages from Victoria, however, represent a more personal assault. The first is an accusation of betrayal. The second, a public shaming, labeling her a cheap replacement. The third is the final condemnation, attributing her actions to jealousy and familial destruction. Elena's response is to delete and block, a decisive act of digital and emotional cauterization. She lacks the resources to engage with Victoria's rage. The knock at the door is a startling intrusion, pulling her back into the present moment.
The arrival of Sarah with a breakfast tray is the first sign of the structured, serviced life she now leads.
A briefing from the household staff reveals Mr. Volkov is unavailable until evening, while his assistant, Claire, will engage her at 10. Elena's sole request is for a vehicle, a tool for a temporary escape from the opulent confinement of the residence. In the anonymity of a cafe, she initiates a deep dive analysis of Adrian. His empire is revealed to be a far more intricate network than anticipated, its influence extending across property, technology, and finance. His public profile is that of a brilliant and ruthless operator. a man who serves on 3 corporate boards and runs 2 charities. Photographic evidence shows a consistent pattern with female companions. They are beautiful, ornamental, and temporary. The key data point is that no single companion ever appears twice, indicating no documented emotional attachments. The data suggests a strategic, deliberate evasion of any genuine emotional connection, a conclusion that resonates with his philosophy of calculated arrangements and lands with a heavy weight in her mind. Claire's call arrives with military precision at 1000 hours, her voice the epitome of crisp efficiency. As Adrian's assistant, her function is to manage Elena's public-facing responsibilities, starting with the gala. She outlines a protocol of fittings and appointments, supplemented by intelligence files on the other guests. These dossiers are not social niceties, but strategic briefs on key figures, tools for navigating the complex social terrain. The process is presented as entirely routine. A stylist is scheduled for 2 the following day. Adrian's own preferences are deemed irrelevant, provided the outcome is appropriate. The sheer precision is notable. "It is my job," Claire states, her tone purely clinical. The files are to be sent for her review. When asked for questions, Elena offers none. "Excellent," Claire concludes. The terminated call leaves Elena feeling like a mere entry on a balance sheet. Adrian's world operates as a flawless machine, where every surface is polished and every action is optimized for cold efficiency. Rather than providing comfort, this environment fosters a sense of erasure, reducing her to an anonymous component in a vast, incomprehensible apparatus. The afternoon dissolves as she wanders the city, a phantom moving through its arteries. This act is a small, desperate assertion of freedom, a brief interlude free from observation or demand. For a few hours, she is simply one face among many. Upon her return near 5 in the evening, a box is waiting. Inside lies a plastic card bearing her new name, accompanied by a handwritten note. "For whatever you need, no limit, no questions." She contemplates the card. No limit. It represents access to a level of power she has never before conceived. The sheer scale of such power feels obscene. She places the card in her wallet, intentionally suppressing any thoughts about the man who could offer such a resource so casually. A profound silence once again dominates the dinner. Exhaustion is clearly visible on both their faces, creating a strange truce that lowers their defenses. Over pasta, they exchange hollow pleasantries. "How was your first day as Mrs. Vulov?" he asks, offering a wine she accepts with some hesitation. "Surreal," she replies, recounting the feeling of criminality while buying coffee with his card. The wine itself likely exceeds her previous weekly budget. She mentions Claire's terrifying efficiency. He concedes the point, admitting his assistant is the sole force preventing his life from collapsing under the weight of its own details. In this moment, his corporate armor seems to recede, his posture relaxing. "Your role at the gala is simple," he explains. "Stay near me, smile when appropriate, and let me handle the politics." Her entire function is to project an image of contentment. He clarifies this is the only requirement, not a miracle, just an absence of misery. He studies her for a moment, then asks if that is too much to ask. She confirms she can manage it and sets down her glass. "May I ask a question?" Her ability to do so, he replies, depends on the question itself. "Why don't you have any friends?" she asks, pointing out that her research reveals only associates and allies, never anyone who appears genuinely close. Adrian's silence is protracted, suggesting he might not answer at all. Finally, he speaks. Friendship requires trust, he states, and trust is a liability I cannot afford. The implication is starkly lonely. It is, he agrees, but loneliness is a controllable variable. People are not. He begins clearing the table, a task normally delegated. Explaining a lesson learned long ago, caring for people grants them the power to destroy you. It is simply more efficient not to care. Is that what you think this is? Her gesture indicates the space between them, a non-caring arrangement. His response, "Isn't that what this is?" leaves her without an answer. They clear the table in silence, their movements synchronized, yet devoid of meaning, like a ballet performed without music. Afterward, Adrien retreats to his office, and Elena ascends to her room. In the darkness, she contemplates the concepts of trust and loneliness, and the inherent paradox of building a life with someone while maintaining a calculated distance. She had agreed to 12 months of this exact paradigm, controlled, bounded, and without emotional risk. Yet an old warning echoes in her thoughts. The line between the role one plays and the person one is can blur into non-existence. She drifts to sleep, wondering on which side of that line she currently stands, and whether she would even recognize the moment it disappeared. The stylist, arriving precisely at 2:00, comes with an armory of garment bags. Named Simone, her effortless grace makes Elena feel like a trespasser. "Claire sent your measurements and the event file," Simone announces, arranging dresses with a surgeon's precision, a black-tie charity gala. The environment demanded conformity, a delicate balance of presence and restraint. After a meticulous process of elimination involving 7 dresses, the 8th was chosen by Simone. It was a gown of deep emerald silk, its opulence a subtle whisper, not a shout. The garment's perfect fit served as an unnerving confirmation, a sign her form had been clinically documented. Simone declared it elegant, ideal for photography, and complementary to Elena's skin, a choice Adrien would endorse. Elena, facing her refined reflection, questioned his typical involvement. Adriana's concern was not style, but social appropriateness. Simone then presented borrowed emerald earrings, simple adornments meant not to compete with the dress. The objective was clear: to be appropriately invisible at Adrian's side, a phrase that struck Elena with the force of an indictment. This was the very skill she had cultivated over a lifetime, now commodified. Once Simone departed with the rejected attire and a promise of shoes, Elena opened Claire's digital brief. It was a 43-page dossier profiling the gala's attendees, their identities, occupations, connections to Adriana's empire, and a list of conversational minefields. The document resembled an intelligence file, a deliberate effect. While she was committing the profile of a developer, Marcus Chen, to memory, Adrien appeared. He inquired if Simone's mission had been successful. Elena confirmed it, noting Simone's prediction of his approval, a statement she found telling. She closed the laptop, asking if such exhaustive intelligence reports were standard for his social events. Only, he clarified, for those where the discussions held strategic value. His posture against the doorframe, marked by fatigue, rendered him momentarily human. He asked if she had reviewed the file on Senator Morrison, the obstacle to his latest project. She had. She noted that his wife, Carolyn Morrison, the true influence in their partnership, held a strong interest in landscape architecture. Adrian's demeanor immediately shifted, becoming tactical. He proposed that a conversation with Carolyn about urban green spaces might soften or even neutralize her opposition to his project. Elena processed the request, He wanted her to leverage her genuine passion for parks to manipulate a senator's wife. He reframed it as a genuine conversation on a topic she loved, where any alignment with his goals was merely a fortunate coincidence. The logic was presented as flawless. He assured her there was no obligation if she felt compromised, but asserted she was uniquely suited for the task. Not because of gender, but because her authentic interest lacked the ulterior motives Caroline was conditioned to expect from men. Adrian stepped away, leaving the choice to her, explicitly stating he would not force her into anything she found objectionable, leaving her to grapple with the insidious nature of his proposal. The request was to weaponize her sincerity, a far more unsettling act than being asked to perform a simple deception. Yet his offer of an out was an unexpected gesture of respect for her autonomy. She returned to the dossier, focusing on Caroline Morrison. With a master's in environmental policy and seats on 3 conservation boards, Caroline had dismantled 2 previous developments. She was not a target for simple charm. This revealed Adrian's gambit. He was either testing Elena's capability or genuinely banking on a moment of authenticity to achieve what his power could not. Elena found both possibilities deeply unsettling. The subsequent 3 days fell into a pattern of strained domesticity. Adrian maintained a schedule of early departures and late returns, their dinners filled with safe, inconsequential talk that demanded nothing from either of them. Their initial days together unfolded with a detached, business-like cadence. Their interactions were brief, utilitarian, and lacked genuine warmth. Despite this, Elena found herself developing a heightened awareness of his movements, unconsciously tracking his presence throughout the residence. The line between her professional duty and a nascent reality began to blur, a disorienting outcome her friend Martha had warned her about. The approaching Friday gala felt like an impending sentence, prompting a call to her friend, Maya, for a dose of manufactured courage. Elena articulated a deep-seated sense of inadequacy. Her friend countered by highlighting her legal bond to Adrian Volkov, positioning her as an equal among the other wives. Acknowledging the clumsiness of the pep talk, the friend's primary advice was to project unwavering confidence. At 4 o'clock, her image consultants arrived, working with clinical precision. They referenced the guest list while sculpting her face and hair to meet the mission's objective, an elevated version of herself. By 6, the transformation was complete. At 6:30, Adrian appeared in a fine tuxedo, pausing as an indecipherable look crossed his face. "You look good," he stated, an understatement so profound it was almost comical. She credited Simone's team, then, picking up a matching clutch, asked if he was prepared for the performance. He affirmed, extending his arm in a mechanical gesture born of tedious repetition. The strategy was one of passive existence. She was not to charm anyone, merely to be present and betray no unease. All other theatrics were forbidden. The event occupied a historic mansion, a rental meant to evoke an aura of established wealth. The driveway was congested with luxury vehicles before a firing line of photographers. Adrian's hand on her back was a gesture less of guidance than of possession. He murmured for her to smile as the cameras flashed, calling this the simple part. The interior was precisely as she'd envisioned. Crystal chandeliers, a string quartet, and staff circulating with champagne. The guests displayed their status through couture and jewels, each a performer in the grand theater of social hierarchy. A woman in her 50s, Catherine, greeted Adrian with air kisses, then turned her analytical gaze on Elena, identifying her as the whispered-about bride. Adrian's introduction was a low murmur, naming Catherine Hayes as the director of the supported foundation and Elena Vulov as his wife. Elena offered a polite smile, met by Catherine's warm expression and calculating eyes. The woman remarked on her surprise at Adrian's marriage, calling him the most resolute bachelor she knew. Elena delivered the prepared lie with chilling ease, suggesting that the right person can alter one's perspective. Catherine's gaze shifted between them, as if trying to reconcile an illogical equation. She welcomed Elena to the circus, deeming the galas a necessary evil. As she moved on, Adrian leaned in, his cologne an invasive presence, and noted that Catherine's approval was a form of social capital. Elena countered that she sensed suspicion, not approval. He dismissed this, saying suspicion was integral to Catherine's professional success. He procured 2 glasses of champagne, handing one to her and directing her attention to Senator Morrison and his wife, Carolyn, indicating he would make an introduction at an opportune moment. She drank the champagne, a futile attempt to quiet the frantic rhythm in her chest. Her 3 days of studying dossiers felt like cramming for an exam where the stakes were profoundly unclear. An hour passed in a series of empty introductions and recited pleasantries. Adriana navigated the room like a seasoned hunter, his social grace another weapon in his arsenal. Elena sustained her role as a beautifully dressed specter, smiling on command while feeling completely negated. Then his hand returned to her back, a firm pressure guiding her towards the Morrisons. Adrian's voice, calibrated for warmth, greeted the senator and Mrs. Morrison and introduced Elena as his wife. The senator, a man of political handshakes, assessed her with a calculating gaze. His wife, Carolyn, embodied a quiet intensity, her composed features suggesting a mind that missed nothing. "A wedding. Congratulations is in order," she observed, her voice devoid of inflection. That was rather abrupt, was it not? Elena's composure remained unbroken. Clarity can be a sudden revelation. When you recognize truth, hesitation serves no purpose. What a delightfully spontaneous act. Yet Carolyn's smile was a hollow gesture. Adrian has never struck me as a man given to impulse. Every person is a repository of secret, Adrian interjected, his voice a smooth balm. Elena, Mrs. Morrison's work in urban conservation is remarkable. I suspected a shared interest between you. The maneuver was so transparent it was almost comical, but a change flickered in Caroline's gaze, suspicion giving way to genuine curiosity. You have a passion for conservation, she inquired. Sustainable urban landscapes, to be precise. It is my area of architectural focus. The truth felt far less draining than continuing the charade. She conceded that this subject was a welcome reprieve from the evening's vapid pleasantries. For the first time, an authentic laugh escaped Caroline, transforming her severe expression. A silent understanding passed between them, a shared acknowledgement of their mutual ennui. She began to dissect the Bryant Park restoration, probing Elena's opinions on indigenous flora. They had stumbled into a genuine dialogue, one entirely separate from Adrian's calculated agenda. As Caroline spoke with fervor about biodiversity initiatives and municipal funding, the knot of anxiety in Elena's chest finally uncoiled. Adrian and the senator had receded into the background, leaving them beside a window that framed the moonlit gardens. Your husband is leveraging you to influence my position on his financial district proposal, Caroline said, her tone being one of clinical analysis, not accusation. A wave of hot shame washed over Elena's face. Indeed. That is his likely motive. His every action is a calculated move. And yet, you are here, engaging in a real discussion rather than advancing his cause. Caroline's gaze was sharp, dissecting her. An interesting decision on your part. The energy required for manipulation is immense. I find it simpler to be a human being. Caroline lifted her glass in a small toast. For the record, his proposal is not without merit pending the environmental assessments. But his coercive methods incline me to veto it on principle alone. Have you conveyed this to him? He is not one to listen. Men like your husband interpret resistance as an invitation to apply more pressure. A look of weary recognition crossed Caroline's face. Perhaps you should frame it in a language he comprehends. Directness can be the most effective strategy. After Caroline departed, Elena remained by the window, uncertain if she had just been armed with a weapon or had merely passed an unspoken evaluation. She concluded it was both. You possess a certain flair for this, a male voice commented beside her. Elena found a man in his 30s, his expensive eyewear and self-assured smirk broadcasting his status. My apologies. David Reeves. I provide some technology consulting for Adrienne. Elena Volkov. The name still felt like an ill-fitting garment. I'm aware of who you are, the entire room is. The enigmatic wife who materialized from thin air. His manner was affable, but his eyes were invasive. I confess to being intrigued. Adrian has been resolutely single for as long as I've known him. We encountered one another at a fundraising gala. We discussed parks. A shared passion was discovered. Elena delivered the rehearsed narrative, praying it sounded credible. Parks. That may be the dullest origin story I have ever encountered, which paradoxically makes it quite plausible. David chuckled. Nonetheless, the timing is notable, occurring so quickly after the collapse of the Victoria Whitmore situation. A sudden, biting cold snaked down Elena's spine. I am not familiar with that to which you refer. Merely that it's a fortuitous sequence of events. Adrian terminates one engagement and promptly weds the sibling. It naturally fuels conjecture. He delivered the line with a casual air, but the words were a sharpened threat. Not that I am suggesting any foul play, of course. Simply that in this world, appearance is the only reality. Then let them conjecture, Elena stated, her voice a flat wall of defense. My connection to Adrian is independent of my sister. Of course it is. David's grin broadened. I am certain it is entirely straightforward. Well, it was a pleasure, Elena. I have no doubt our paths will cross again. He moved away, leaving Elena clutching her champagne glass with enough force to threaten its integrity. The subtext was unmistakable. She was being monitored for any sign of weakness. Adrian appeared at her elbow, his eyes immediately registering her distress. What was the nature of that exchange? David Reeves. He was impeccably polite while insinuating our marriage was a strategic alliance. Elena placed her glass on a tray before she shattered it. Is this kind of passive-aggressive combat standard for everyone, or is it reserved for the new bride? It is the universal protocol. This is their form of warfare, with veiled provocations and searches for vulnerabilities, all conducted under the guise of plausible deniability. A hard edge entered Adrian's jaw. What were his exact words? Elena relayed the conversation, observing his expression harden into a mask of cold fury, a stark reminder of the danger he could project. I will address David, he said, his voice dangerously low. Do not. That will only escalate the situation. It will portray me as someone requiring defense. The conviction in her own tone was a surprise even to her. I can manage rumors. I was raised alongside Victoria. I understand the rules of this particular game. Adrian regarded her for a long, quiet beat, and a subtle shift occurred in his gaze. Then so be it. However, if this speculation transforms into overt harassment, I insist on being notified. For the subsequent hour, the facade remained intact. Elena moved through a tide of unfamiliar faces, the social exertion creating a dizzying haze. A smile, stretched taut across her lips, became a shield against the oppressive weight of scrutiny. Her exit was defined by a profound exhaustion that was entirely psychological. In the vehicle, Adrian was a dark form against the fleeting city lights. Your performance this evening was valuable, he stated at last. In fact, more than valuable. You elicited a genuine smile from Carolyn Morrison, a feat I have failed to achieve in 3 months of negotiations. She perceives you as being too aggressive. She believes honesty would be a more productive path than legal intimidation. Adrian angled his body toward her. She revealed that to you? She did, and she also noted, your proposal has potential, provided you address the environmental concerns with integrity. Elena let her head rest against the leather seat. I believe she was probing my allegiance to see if I would relay the intelligence or retain it for my own advantage. And your reason for telling me is because the psychological toll of the artifice is too great, and I do not have the constitution for these strategic games. Elena shut her eyes. Furthermore, her assessment is most likely accurate. Your methods do appear excessively forceful. She anticipated he would react defensively to the critique, but instead a real laugh broke from him, entirely unlike his calculated corporate chuckle. That is quite possibly the most sincere piece of feedback I have received in years. All of my subordinates provide only carefully curated, obsequious affirmations. Would you prefer I adopt a similar approach? No. The denial was immediate, carrying an unexpected force. No, I would not. They traveled the remaining distance in a shared, comfortable quiet which felt like a form of progress. Inside, Elena removed the costly heels Simone had selected, losing 3 inches of stature but reclaiming a small piece of herself. I am appreciative of your assistance, Adrian said in the foyer, for what you did tonight. It was a stipulation of our agreement. Elena started up the stairs, but then paused. Adrian, the point David raised about appearances and timing, will that create a significant issue? People will invariably talk. Their narratives are irrelevant so long as we are secure in our own reality. He undid his tie, appearing as deeply weary as she felt. Obtain some rest. We can hold a debriefing in the morning if you wish. Elena retreated to her room, shed the emerald dress, and stored it away as if it were evidence from a life she had yet to fully comprehend. She removed the layers of professional makeup and studied her reflection, attempting to reconcile the operative who had navigated a high society event with the woman who had spent years cultivating invisibility. She was about to climb into bed when her phone illuminated the darkness. It was Mia's number. Provide a status update, Mia's voice came through. It went surprisingly well until an individual implied I was a conniving opportunist who had engineered my way into Adrian's life. Elena gathered the blankets around herself like a protective barrier, but I endured. I held a rational conversation about landscape architecture and only felt the urge to flee the room screaming approximately 3 times. I am classifying that as a victory. A wave of relief was audible in Mia's voice. See? You are capable of this. I am uncertain I am capable of it for 12 months. Everyone there is perpetually performing, analyzing every utterance, searching for leverage in every exchange. It was utterly depleting. Then cease performing, simply be yourself and force them to contend with that. Mia yawned audibly. You are not obligated to engage in their psychological warfare merely because you now inhabit their world. After ending the call, Elena lay in the dark, contemplating the concepts of performance versus authenticity, of what the self becomes when one's identity feels like a temporary loan. She had fulfilled the role of the family specter for so long, unnoticed, compliant, insignificant, that she had lost touch with her own core programming. Perhaps the coming 12 months were about something more than just fulfilling a contract. Perhaps they were an opportunity to find out who Elena was when no one was dictating her role. The idea was equally liberating and terrifying. Sleep must have overtaken her, for her next awareness was of sunlight cutting through the window and a frantic knocking on her door that signaled a crisis. Elena rose from bed and opened it to find Sarah, her expression a mask of dire seriousness. Your family has arrived, Sarah announced. The entire family. They are currently in the driveway, demanding to see you, and they are refusing to leave. A cold dread tightened in Elena's stomach. How did they locate me at this address? Does that matter? They are present, and they are creating a public disturbance. Their ultimatum was a threat to involve the police if denied entry. Sarah's expression remained a mask of professional poise. She relayed that Adrian was in his office, but had sent her to ask for Elena's directive. Elena's hands shook as she dressed, her thoughts chaotic. While the confrontation was foreseen, its timing was disastrous. She lacked the emotional fortification needed to face her family's unified assault. She instructed Sarah to tell them she would be down in 5 minutes and to inform Adrian that she was managing the situation. After Sarah's departure, Elena faced her reflection, marshaling a fabricated courage, and descended the stairs. Through the foyer glass, she saw the formation: her father's Mercedes, her mother's Range Rover, and Victoria's BMW. Her parents stood like a monument to aristocratic fury. Nearby, Victoria paced, her distress flawlessly contained as she spoke into her phone. Elena took a steadying breath and opened the door. Her appearance ignited a visceral response. A mask of fury consumed her mother's features, while her father moved to physically obstruct her, prompting Victoria to snap her phone closed. Catherine's voice was a sharpened instrument of accusation. What, precisely, is the outcome of your actions? Are you aware of the catastrophe you've unleashed upon this family? I entered into a marriage. It is a rather conventional act. Elena maintained her position on the uppermost step, leveraging the elevation. I must insist you depart. This is a private estate. An estate acquired with illicit funds by the very criminal to whom you are now bound. Richard's complexion deepened to a choleric purple, the veins on his neck standing out in sharp relief. Whatever promises he made, whatever deceit he employed, this situation concludes now. You will return home, where we will have this mockery of a marriage annulled. I am 24 years of age, and my marriage was a willing choice. No legal grounds exist for an annulment. A surprising firmness anchored Elena's own voice. I will not be returning. I wish for no more communication. Kindly leave. You unappreciative little... Catherine began her ascent. Elena remained motionless. Do not! The single word emerged with an unintended force. My entire existence has been a study in being grateful for meager portions of affection, for the least desirable bedroom, for the simple state of being tolerated within my own family. I am finished feeling indebted for being treated as an encumbrance. We provided everything for you. Catherine's voice escalated toward a shriek. A residence, schooling, opportunities you would have otherwise been denied. You provided a room the size of a utility closet and required my reverence in return. You neglected my birthday for 3 consecutive years. You presented me as the other one, a mere footnote to the family. Elena felt the surfacing of a lifetime of suppressed indignation. You offered the barest of minimums and demanded my worship for it. Victoria at last broke her silence, her voice trembling with an emotion Elena could not decipher. How could you possibly marry him, considering what he did to me? How? He did nothing to you, Victoria. He terminated a fractured engagement and subsequently married you. The perfection of Victoria's face seemed to disintegrate. My own sister? You anticipated this eventuality, didn't you? Positioned to seize a prize you were convinced belonged to me. Yet Adrian was never an object to be claimed. You desired the facade he represented, the influence, the prestige, the ideal social accessory. You failed to perceive the man himself, nor did you have any inclination to. A deep exhaustion washed over Elena, the fatigue of a lifetime performing this role. I have taken nothing that was yours. His choice was for me because I recognized a person, not a possession. You are deluding yourself if you believe his feelings for you are genuine. Victoria's voice retorted with surgical precision. He is a tool for some purpose. A man of Adrian Volkoff's stature does not marry a non-entity without a hidden motive. The term landed with calculated malice. Nobody. Elena had registered it in subtle dismissals, yet hearing Victoria articulate it felt like a physical impact. It is possible I am a nobody in your sphere, Elena stated, her voice almost inaudible. But I would choose to be nothing over living an existence dedicated to gaining your approval. This is insanity. Richard ascended another step, the aroma of his cologne becoming an unwelcome intrusion. You are returning home, Elena, immediately. We will address this as rational adults once you have abandoned this juvenile insubordination. This is not an act of defiance. It is a departure. Elena held her ground, suppressing the urge to retreat. I owe you no justification, no amends. My decision has been made. It is final. You've made an error that will shadow every day of your future, Catherine hissed, her tone descending into a coldness more piercing than any shout. When Adrian Volkoff inevitably shatters you, for it is the nature of men like him, do not think of crawling back to us. I shall not, Elena affirmed. You have my unequivocal word on that. The door behind her opened, and Adrian emerged onto the porch. He made no move to touch Elena, maintaining a deliberate distance, yet his presence alone altered the very atmosphere of the conflict. Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore, he acknowledged, the flawless courtesy in his voice a thinly veiled menace. I understand my wife has requested your departure. I would advise you to comply. You have no authority to keep her from us, Richard blustered. But Adrian's focused gaze silenced him. I am not keeping her from anyone. Elena is a grown woman, responsible for her own decisions. Should she want your presence, she will seek it out. Her current lack of desire for it is equally her right. His cadence was almost conversational, a placid surface over inflexible resolve. What you will not do is materialize on my land to issue directives and threats. That is not the protocol here. How could you? Catherine started, but Adrian continued as though uninterrupted. I possess a complete recording of this interaction. I also retain excellent legal counsel who would be intrigued to examine the principles of harassment and trespassing were this to reoccur. He displayed his phone. Should I contact them, or are you capable of escorting yourselves off the premises? A sound escaped Victoria, a hybrid of a sob and a scream. I despise you both. I hope your life together is one of absolute misery. She fled toward her car, the door slamming with enough force to vibrate the windows before she sped away, leaving black streaks upon the driveway. Catherine and Richard departed in her wake, their expressions a clear vow that this conflict was only beginning. For the moment, however, they were gone. Elena remained on the porch, observing the disappearing taillights, feeling like the lone survivor of a conflict that had decimated the landscape of her spirit. A tremor began in her hands, her body's delayed response now that the threat had receded. Are you unharmed? Adrian's voice was low beside her. No, but I will be. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, a sudden chill permeating her bones. I appreciate the support. It was not required. Yes, it was. We are presenting a united front, if you recall. He paused. For whatever it may be worth, you managed that situation with more composure than I would have predicted. Many would have collapsed under such a psychological onslaught. I have considerable experience in not collapsing. Elena pivoted toward the door, then hesitated. Adrian. Victoria referred to me as a nobody. Is that your perception of me? He studied her for a long, quiet interval, his features unreadable. Nobody is a term people employ when they have lost their capacity to influence you. It is not a descriptor, it is a weapon. The fact that it still wounds you, he noted, indicates you have not fully severed your dependency on their validation. Is that a flaw? It is a human trait. He held the door open for her. Let us go inside. Thomas has prepared a meal, and you appear to require caffeine to be operational. They sat within the quiet kitchen, the simple ritual of consuming eggs and toast steadying the tremor in Elena's hands. Adrian did not press her for conversation or demand an analysis of her emotional state. His presence from across the table served as an anchor, more substantial than any hollow platitudes could be. They will not relent, Elena said into the silence. My family does not abandon a struggle when they are convinced of their righteousness. Neither do I, Adrian answered, refilling her coffee cup. And my resources are significantly greater than theirs. Should they opt to escalate, we will manage it as one. The phrase as one ignited an unfamiliar sensation in Elena's chest. This was designed as a contract, a transaction with clear boundaries. But in the space between the public charade and the private battle, a fundamental change had occurred. The arrangement was beginning to feel less like an alliance and more like a partnership. She declared a sudden, urgent need to walk, a desperate search for atmosphere, for territory within her own mind. I need to clear my head. You will take Marcus. I would prefer you had security after this morning's events. Elena lacked the will for a debate. She changed, and Marcus chauffeured her to a park she had previously reconnoitered. He remained by the vehicle as she explored paths engineered to mimic untamed nature. The area teemed with weekend families and unaware couples, absorbed in realities far from her specific turmoil. This anonymity was a strange solace, a reminder that existence was vaster than her suffering. Her phone vibrated. A check-in from Maya. Elena replied with a brief assurance that she was fine, a fiction that masqueraded as truth. For 1 hour she walked, the rhythm of her movement silencing the frantic pulse of her thoughts. They had appeared, they had spoken their venom, and they had departed. She had held her position, she had prevailed. That, in itself, was a form of triumph. Upon her return, Adrian was in the library, his laptop displaying what appeared to be a deluge of messages. He looked up at her arrival. "Better?" he inquired, approaching it. Elena settled into the opposite chair, abruptly unwilling to face solitude once more. "May I ask a personal question?" "You may always ask. I may not always respond. When did you last allow someone to truly perceive you? Not a business associate, not an acquaintance. The person beneath it all." Adrian's silence was so prolonged, Elena assumed he would decline. Finally, he spoke. "I was 19. Her name was Natasha. She perished in a car accident 6 months into our relationship. Following that, I concluded the cost of intimacy was too steep." The statement landed between them, dense and factual. Elena had not anticipated such raw candor. She was unsure how to process it. "I am sorry," she finally offered. "It was a very long time ago." Adrian closed the laptop, offering her his complete singular focus. "What is the purpose of this question?" "To determine if our arrangement remains a performance, or if something genuine is developing beneath the facade." Elena met his stare, "And I believe you are attempting to solve the same puzzle." "Possibly." He moved toward the window, gazing out at the property. "The contract is nullified should romantic feelings emerge. However, it fails to delineate the boundary between romance and basic human empathy. Is that your sentiment?" "Empathy for me?" "Yes." The confession was stark, a reality he had evidently already processed, a departure from the established protocol. "And yet, we remain." Elena joined him, standing close enough to sense his warmth without making contact. "So, what is our next step?" "It is ambiguous. The strategic option would be to withdraw, to reestablish the parameters and recall the transient basis of this arrangement." Adrian pivoted to her. "But I have grown weary of exclusively strategic options. Logic has built my success, and it has also guaranteed my profound isolation. What is the alternative?" We observe its trajectory, cautiously, with full awareness. His hand located hers with a hesitancy she had never before witnessed in him. No guarantees, no defined route, merely observation. It was perhaps the most unromantic proposition she had ever received. It was also delivered with a stark sincerity that made her heart ache. "Agreed," she replied. "We'll observe its trajectory." They stood there by the window, hands connected like tentative adolescents, and Elena recalled Martha's caution about the line between pretense and reality becoming indistinct. She suspected they had unknowingly crossed that line long ago, and she was unable to discern if it was her most significant error or the finest choice she had ever made. Outside, the gardens were an exercise in calculated perfection. Each plant was selected for a distinct role, a specific visual goal. It could have appeared artificial, but instead it simply looked deliberate. Something was judged important enough to execute correctly. Perhaps she and Adrian were doing likewise. Concluding this was important enough to attempt, The shift in his demeanor was initially subtle, easily overlooked had Elena not been so observant. Adrian began returning home earlier, remaining for dinner with greater frequency. Their discussions lengthened, straying from neutral subjects into more intimate territory. They started to converse about literature, past journeys, subjects with no connection to commerce and every connection to the human experience. He inquired about her communications degree. She admitted a desire to study environmental design, which had been dismissed as impractical. He alluded to a childhood where vulnerability was a fatal flaw, and she did not press for details. 3 weeks following the party, a parcel awaited her. Inside was a volume on contemporary landscape architecture. A note in Adrian's precise script said, "Thought this might hold your interest?" A. The quiet scale of the gesture created a knot in Elena's throat she chose not to analyze. Someone had paid attention. Someone had remembered. That this felt so remarkable was, in itself, a revelation. She located him in the kitchen, consuming coffee while navigating his phone, already encased in his daily suit of armor. "Thank you for the book," she stated, presenting it. "That was not necessary. I am aware. It was my choice." He looked up, then averted his gaze as though her appreciation was an element he was unequipped to manage. "There is a lecture series commencing at the university next month. On sustainable urban design, I imagined you might wish to attend." Elena stared. "You investigated lecture series on landscape architecture?" Claire handled the research, I merely tasked her with it. But the tips of his ears flushed red, the most human detail she had ever seen on him. "If you lack interest, it is of no consequence. It was merely a suggestion. I would very much like to go." Elena sat opposite him with her own coffee. "Adrian, are we becoming friends?" "I suspect that may be the situation," he replied, the words chosen carefully as if testing their substance. "Does that present a complication?" "No, merely unforeseen." Elena traced the edge of her mug. "The agreement stipulates termination for romantic attachment. It makes no mention of friendship. One more factor we failed to incorporate into our projections." The edge of Adrian's mouth curved into the faintest hint of a smile. "Friendship could pose a greater risk than romance. Love, by its nature, provides clear advance warnings. But what were the indicators for this? A fixation on another's well-being, a desire for their happiness, the hollow feeling of their absence." His gaze met hers. "Purchasing a volume on landscape architecture simply because you understand its significance to another person." A strange constriction took hold of Elena's chest. "Those seem to be signals we should be monitoring. Perhaps. Do you intend to?" Not in the slightest. His candor was startling, yet it felt appropriate for the new, strange territory between them. "And you?" "No." Adrian stood gathering his belongings. "I have a dinner engagement. I will return late, but my schedule is clear tomorrow. We could engage in an activity, should you desire. For instance?" "I am uncertain." "Conventional people activities. A meal without a business objective. A film. Your preference." He paused at the doorway. "I have forgotten how to do anything for pure enjoyment. It may be a skill worth reclaiming." After his departure, Elena lingered in the kitchen with the new book, attempting to chart the shifting terrain between them. This had originated as a contract. 12 months, defined boundaries, a transaction of mutual benefit. But at some point, the boundaries had dissolved into nothingness. They were evolving into something unplanned, and Elena could not determine if it was a positive or a perilous development. It felt like both. The remainder of her day was consumed by Adrian's book as she made notes, immersing herself in concepts of space and design. It was akin to unearthing a fragment of her soul she had interred to become the obedient daughter. Maya's call arrived that afternoon, her tone bright with a manufactured cheer. "How is matrimony in the manor with the formidable man?" "Complicated." Elena migrated to her room's window seat, observing the progressively familiar gardens. "He gave me a book, Maya, solely because he imagined I might enjoy it." "The fiend?" "The absolute audacity of his consideration? You grasp my meaning. This was designed to be a straightforward, sterile arrangement with a clean conclusion." Elena pulled her knees to her chest. "But he is entirely different from my initial assessment, and I am likely not what he anticipated. So what is the subsequent move?" "No data exists. We are simply allowing it to progress, which is arguably the most illogical decision I have ever made." "Or the most courageous," Maya retorted. "Your entire existence has been oriented around safety, maintaining a low profile, avoiding disruption. Perhaps it is time you risked something that genuinely matters." Following the call, Elena compared risk with security, the unknown with the familiar discontent she had abandoned. Her family's version of safety was a confinement, a small space, perpetual invalidation, a gradual, stifling end. Adrian was an unknown quantity, alarming yet possessing a vitality her secure world always lacked. The next evening, he brought her to a small Italian restaurant in a district she had never visited. No reservations, no strategic seating, no clientele to court. Only two individuals consuming pasta and discussing inconsequential things. "This is an aberration," Elena reflected, coiling linguine around her fork. Here, the performance of identity ceases. "An anomaly," she muses, "but a welcome one." Across the table, the archetype of the corporate titan deconstructs. The man who commands markets appears uncertain in this simple setting. Elena probes his carefully constructed reality. Are any actions truly his own? His confession is telling. Every move is an instrument for a desired result. For a strategist like Adrian, to exist without a mission is to be unmoored. Tonight's objective, then, is its absence. He voices a simple desire for her presence, a truth so direct it strikes at the core of Elena's narrative of being endured, competed with by Victoria, or ignored. To Adrian, the failure of others to see her value is a fundamental error in their perception. Adrian's assessment of Elena is not a mere compliment. It is an articulation of her intrinsic value, which he argues others failed to perceive. This validation overwhelms her defenses, breaching the professional parameters they had established. For him, these boundaries are now arbitrary constructs. He proposes a paradigm shift for their remaining 9 months. Maintain the pretense or confront the emergent, genuine connection. But his roadmap for this new territory is blank. The admission reveals his own schism, a master of corporate strategy, yet a neophyte in human intimacy. He offers an attempt, contingent on her participation, a sign that their original agreement, a legal document protecting a deal, is now obsolete. His touch is a deliberate test, an offer of escalation with a clear exit clause. The decision is hers. For Elena, this is a study in gilded cages, escaping one only to face another masked as partnership. Her ingrained survival instincts advocate for a retreat into emotional isolation. Yet, she is fatigued by perpetual vigilance. Her choice is a conscious embrace of the illogical, a willing step toward probable catastrophe. Adrian confirms the high likelihood of failure, inventorying his own pathologies. a need for control and emotional distance. Elena counters with her own inventory of damage, proposing a pact of mutual wreckage. Here we witness the formulation of a deeply flawed, yet profoundly honest, interpersonal strategy. When challenged for a superior method, none exists. The admission is marked by a rare, unpracticed smile. Their subsequent conversation flows, unbound by agenda. The unbroken physical contact as they depart signifies a new continuity, a disquieting rightness rooted in a foundation of shared trauma. In the car, their proximity presents Elena with a stark dichotomy. This path leads to either salvation or ruin. Her gratitude is for being truly seen, for being chosen. Adrian's response reframes her history, positing her value as an objective fact, independent of her family's flawed perception. Back at the house, the power players are reduced to the awkward hesitation of a first encounter. The vastness of the foyer contracts, its psychological space shrinking to frame only the two of them. Elena's stated intention to leave is contradicted by her stillness. Adriana's response is a study in deliberate motion, each gesture a tactic to prolong the moment. The topic is inconsequential. The goal is proximity. As he holds her face, his composure finally fractures. Elena's internal logic dictates retreat, but she consciously overrides it. Her kiss is a tentative hypothesis posed without words. The response is immediate and overwhelming as a controlled impulse erupts into raw necessity. The world shifts, leaving a moment of pure, unguarded connection. "A tactical error," Adrian rasped, his voice strained. "A complete one." In response, Elena kissed him once more, this time with deliberation, searing every detail into her memory. "This must cease. I am aware." Yet his hold on her did not slacken, and she made no move to retreat. They remained locked together in the entryway, clinging to each other as though separation would court calamity. The intrusion of reality finally broke the spell, and they parted, their faces flushed, their composure lost. Elena felt a demarcation point had been crossed within her from which there was no return. "This warrants a discussion," Adrian stated. "Tomorrow, we will address it tomorrow." Taking a step back, Elena sought the space to clear her thoughts. "I must go to my room now, before I act with even greater recklessness." "More reckless than what we just did?" "Precisely." She moved toward the stairs, then glanced back. "I need you to understand I have no regrets." "Nor do I." He appeared profoundly fractured, his renowned self-possession vanished. "Rest well, Elena." She just reached her room before collapsing onto the bed, her legs failing her, her fingers tracing the lingering sensation of his kiss on her lips. This arrangement was supposed to be a contract. What had originated as a business agreement with explicit conditions and a termination date now felt hopelessly convoluted. Her phone vibrated. It was Maya, her timing bordering on the psychic. "How was the meal with your high-stakes husband?" Elena composed her response. "I kissed him." The reply was instantaneous. "Excuse me, contact me immediately." Instead, Elena powered down the device, reclining to gaze at the ceiling. She mentally replayed the evening's events, attempting to determine whether she had just salvaged the operation or condemned it to failure. The following morning was heavy with an anticipated strain. Elena descended the stairs to discover Adrian in the kitchen. They commenced a delicate ballet of averted eyes, a silent performance of normalcy. "Coffee?" he offered. "Yes, please." They took seats at the table with a deliberate distance between them, the previous night's encounter suspended in the air. We likely need to address what transpired, Adrian finally said. That would be the sensible course of action. Elena cupped her hands around the warm mug. I have no regret, but I lack clarity on its meaning or our subsequent path. I share that same uncertainty. He ran a hand through his hair, a characteristic indicator of his agitation. Adrian presents a choice: invoke an existing contractual escape clause or navigate the new reality. His solution is not to discard the contract, but to amend it, to legally codify the emotional shift. He begins to operationalize this, outlining revised terms and contingency protocols. Elena recognizes this as his core operating principle, imposing order on chaos through legal documentation. He admits it is his only known methodology to formalize and mitigate risk. She agrees, but with a crucial amendment: the new terms must explicitly allow for human error and emotional chaos. He accepts these new, softer parameters. They exchange declarations of their inherent flaws, preemptively disclosing the faulty programming each brings to the venture. He will pathologize emotion with strategy. She will remain fortified by trauma. They agree to the experiment, despite the known defects in the subjects. Adrienne frames it as an attempt, actively rejecting romanticized labels. Their pact is sealed, not with a promise of success, but only of effort. Elena's sarcastic remark highlights the pragmatic nature of his affection. Just as they formalize their plan, an external force intrudes. The doorbell is an anomaly in their controlled environment, signaling a threat to their fragile new construct. A casual visit was an impossibility. Marcus loomed in the doorway, his expression a mask of grim duty. Mr. Vulov, a Detective Chen is present. She insists the matter is urgent. The warmth instantly receded from Adrienne, replaced by a detached corporate armor. Escort her to my office. Elena, remain here. What is happening? I lack sufficient data, but a 7 a.m. police visit is rarely a social call. He was already moving toward his study, phone in hand, his thumbs a blur across the screen. Marcus, contact our legal counsel. Elena stood immobilized in the kitchen, a sidelined spectator to the muffled conversation emanating from the office. Adrienne's tone was meticulously controlled, while the woman's was sharp and authoritative. The specific words were lost to her, but the cadence itself was a harbinger of disaster. Something was deeply amiss. When Adrienne emerged 20 minutes later, he seemed to have aged a decade. His face was a void, a neutral slate, far more alarming than any display of anger. What was that about? She ventured. An incident has occurred. A fire at one of my construction sites last night. There was a fatality. His voice was devoid of emotion, hollowed out. The authorities suspect arson, and I am a person of interest. The room seemed to warp around Elena. That is preposterous. You are incapable of such an act. My capabilities are irrelevant. What is relevant is the narrative they can construct. Adrienne's jaw was set like stone. I possess enemies, Elena, individuals who would relish my downfall. This could be their opening gambit. What is our next move? Your function is to do nothing. You are to remain entirely removed from this situation. He was already heading for the door, retrieving his keys. I must confer with my legal team, preempt the investigation, and initiate damage control. This is about to become exceptionally unpleasant. Adrienne, please wait. Not at this time. I cannot. He paused, taking a deliberate, calming breath. My apologies. I must address this. Remain here within the secure perimeter. Then he was gone. Elena was abandoned in the foyer with a cooling coffee and the precarious, complex structure they had just begun to erect, which now felt as though it might shatter under the weight of the external world. The day unfolded with the slow, agonizing torment of confinement. Elena attempted to engage with the book Adrienne had given her, but the text refused to cohere. She contacted Maya, whose encouraging words offered a solace that altered nothing. She prowled the residence like a confined predator, while Sarah, the housekeeper, maintained a facade of normalcy. The news appeared online around noon. Headlines blared about a deadly fire and an arson probe, with Adrian Volkov's name enmeshed with terms like negligence and foul play. A surge of nausea struck Elena as she scanned the articles, observing anonymous strangers dismantle his reputation based on speculation and old resentments. Adrienne was absent for dinner. A text message materialized near 8 o'clock. Detained with attorneys, do not wait. Elena dined alone in the cavernous dining room, haunted by the velocity of their unraveling. Just yesterday, they were charting a shared future. Today, he was battling for his liberty while she was sequestered in his home, utterly inert. She was preparing for sleep when she detected the front door opening, followed by the sound of heavy footfalls on the staircase. Opening her bedroom door, she found Adrian in the corridor, looking completely devastated. He materialized in the hallway that evening, an embodiment of acute stress, his attire disheveled, his posture slumped with exhaustion. His surprise at finding her awake underscored how far they had deviated from their established rhythm. She adopted a consoling posture by instinct, her voice gentle with empathy as she approached him. "I'm not well," he conceded, the admission unvarnished, referencing the inquiry and the assault on his reputation. When she inquired what he required, he admitted he was simply weary of managing the crisis. She then guided him to her room, creating a sanctuary where the burden of control could be relinquished. This inversion of roles, where the protected became the protector, signified a pivotal shift in their connection, solidifying her emotional investment in his survival. Elena positioned herself near him on the bed, not making contact, yet her presence was a palpable influence in the space. "I apologize," Adrienne stated, his voice a near whisper. "This situation is far beyond the scope of our arrangement, and this emotional bond is as well, but it exists." In the dim light, Elena extended her hand, enveloping his. "Whatever is transpiring, we will confront it as a unit. Is that not the revised protocol? Unity." He returned the pressure of her hand. "Operating as a unit is not my default behavior. My programming is for solitary crisis management." "You will adapt. The contract stipulates we have a minimum of 9 more months." Elena drew nearer, resting her head against his shoulder. "For now, just attempt to rest. We will dissect the new variables tomorrow." She perceived the tension gradually ebbing from his body, his respiration steadying as fatigue finally overcame the stress. Elena remained conscious long after he succumbed to sleep, listening to his breathing and assessing her own entanglement. This was designed as a clean exchange, yet there is nothing clean about investing in someone's fate or feeling the powerful urge to shield them from a hostile world. The subsequent week was a chaotic montage of lawyers, private detectives, and a desperate campaign to manage his public image. Adrian sequestered himself in his study, a self-imposed banishment punctuated only by silent, perfunctory meals. The warmth that had begun to blossom between them wilted under the duress of the inquiry, supplanted by the cold strategist she had initially married. Elena strove to grant him space while signaling her support, a delicate equilibrium she struggled to achieve. Sarah relayed case developments when Adrian was inaccessible, and Marcus chauffeured Elena to lectures Adrian had previously recommended, a peculiar but essential ritual to uphold a semblance of ordinary existence. After 10 days, a breakthrough occurred. The police detained a disgruntled former employee. It was determined to be arson, a personal vendetta. Adriana was the intended victim, not an accomplice. The formal exoneration arrived quickly, but the tarnish on his reputation would require more time to fade. That evening, he discovered Elena in the library, hesitating at the entrance like a foreigner, uncertain of his right to enter his own residence. "It is concluded," he declared, the statement suspended in the quiet air. "The investigation, the allegations. It is all finished." "I am aware," Sarah informed me. Elena closed her book, her expression unwavering. "How do you feel?" "Relieved, enraged, exhausted." He crossed the room and collapsed into the armchair opposite hers. "I must offer you an apology." "For what, specifically?" "For excluding you. For reverting to my old solitary protocols instead of allowing you to participate." His voice was raw, laden with an emotion he made no attempt to conceal. "You asserted we were partners, and I abandoned that principle the moment adversity struck." "You were neutralizing a threat. It is a predictable response. But it is not correct, not if our goal is to construct something authentic." He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "My instinct is to repel anyone who becomes significant. And you are significant, Elena. When I perceived a threat, I sought to distance you for your protection. That is not a partnership. That is cowardice." Placing her book on the carpet, Elena knelt before him, taking both of his hands. "You are not a coward. You are a man who has endured enough pain to erect fortifications simply to survive. These fortifications need not be permanent," he stated. "I lack the expertise to dismantle them," she answered. "We will dismantle them collaboratively through a disordered process of errors, communication, and likely some conflict." Elena's grip on his hands tightened. "But it is a joint venture, no longer a solitary one. That is the revised term." Adrian drew her onto his lap, his embrace so secure she could feel the rhythm of his heart. "I entered this arrangement believing I was providing you with something, a rescue, stability. Instead, you have given me something I was unaware I was missing." "And what is that?" she inquired. "A motive to attempt being human, not merely strategic." He kissed her forehead, then her cheeks, and then her mouth. "Thank you for not deserting me when I isolated myself. Thank you for re-emerging when you could have remained concealed." Elena rested her head against his chest. "We are two exceptionally fractured individuals, are we not?" "Oh, completely. But perhaps our specific forms of damage are complementary." Adrian's arms enveloped her more firmly. 9 months remain. Do you believe we have a realistic prospect?" "I believe we can try. That was the only promise we ever truly made." Elena pulled back, observing his expression. "However, several terms may require renegotiation." "What manner of terms?" he questioned. "The clause stipulating separate bedrooms now appears excessively formal, given the current context." A blush warmed her face, but she held his gaze. "I would like to amend it to align with our present reality." A slow, potent smile illuminated Adrian's face. "Our present reality being that I wish to wake beside you, that I desire this to be genuine, not a performance." Elena took a breath. The present reality is that I am developing a profound attachment to you, and I have ceased resisting it. Elena, she continued, I recognize the immense risk, the irrationality, and the probable breach of our contract in numerous ways, but it is of no consequence to me. I am choosing this. I am choosing you. She cupped his face with her hands. If you will choose me in return. Adrienne's response was a kiss, so profound and absolute it conveyed more than words ever could. When they parted, the smile he offered her transformed his entire demeanor. I choose you in return, he whispered. I choose this. Regardless of the outcome, I choose to try. They lay together that night, not as performers or strategists, but as two fractured beings electing to be vulnerable, electing to try, despite every instinct that demanded they flee. Dawn found Elena in Adriana's embrace, the morning light pouring across gardens that had begun to feel like their own territory. In slumber, his features held a tranquility she seldom witnessed in his waking hours. Their arrangement was designed as a temporary construct, a 12-month contract with a clean severance. Yet in that stillness, observing the simple rhythm of his breath, Elena recognized she had traversed an emotional threshold from which there was no retreat. She was in love with Adrian Vulov. This realization, which ought to have sparked alarm, instead felt like a final arrival. 3 years had eclipsed the signing of that 1-year pact, yet the clarity of that moment remained etched in her memory. It was not their staged wedding, nor a public debut, but a quiet morning when she awoke to his absence and felt a profound, structural wrongness in her world. The pretense of separate rooms had dissolved around the 8-month mark, a transition so organic that neither could pinpoint its origin. A conversation that drifted into sleep on her sofa. A week later, the same in his study. In time, the performance of distance became more taxing than the admission of their mutual gravity. On their first anniversary, they incinerated the contract, a clandestine ceremony involving only themselves and a vintage wine valued more than her first automobile. Their second marriage, 2 months later in a Stark courthouse, was an act of genuine commitment witnessed by Maya and Marcus far from the glare of any lens. But this particular morning, the void in the bed triggered a cascade of internal warnings. Adrienne never departed without notice. A text on her phone, sent 3 hours prior, read, "A situation requires my attention. Do not be concerned. I will be home shortly." In their shared lexicon, "do not be concerned" was a coded signal for imminent peril, and Elena had become fluent in Adriane's particular dialect of understatement. From a foundation of pure calculation, they had cultivated something authentic. She was preparing coffee when Sarah materialized at the kitchen entrance, her expression so somber it caused Elena's stomach to seize. "Mrs. Volkov, there is a development. Adrienne instructed me to keep you apprised." Sarah's tone was flawlessly composed. "A direct threat has been issued against him, which by extension includes you. He is containing it, but he insisted you be made aware should security postures require adjustment." Elena placed her mug on the counter before her trembling hands betrayed her. "What is the nature of the threat?" "It is one we categorize as both credible and severe. That is the extent of what I am permitted to disclose." A flicker of empathy crossed Sarah's professional facade. "He is employing every possible precaution. Marcus is with him, and his security detail is unparalleled. His intent was only to prepare you for potential disruptions." After Sarah's departure, Elena attempted to navigate the routines of her day, responding to emails, assessing blueprints for a garden renovation, yet her focus continually fractured, her gaze returning to her phone every 5 minutes for a notification that never materialized. By midday, the anxiety had transmuted into a cold fury. She called Adrienne, but the call went directly to voicemail. She attempted to reach Marcus with the same result. Whatever was unfolding, they had sealed her out. The gesture intended as protection only ignited her rage. She was pacing the library when her phone finally chimed, displaying an unlisted number. The subject was Elena Vuloff. The voice was masculine, foreign, and its inherent menace was a visceral assault. Her query, "Who is this?" was answered with a stark and terrifying declaration. "I am someone who possesses what you value." Her husband's misjudged business affairs were named as the catalyst, having provoked formidable adversaries. She was told he had been seized and was then issued a set of rigid, non-negotiable terms for his release. The room seemed to lose its axis. She gripped a chair for support. The voice remained a monotone instrument of threat, asserting that her husband's survival was contingent entirely upon her compliance. The price was $2 million in untraceable currency to be delivered within 1 hour. The protocol for the exchange was absolute. She would arrive at the designated location alone, or the consequences would be lethal. Her faint whisper, "Yes, I understand," signified that the directive had been received, even as her reality disintegrated. The connection was severed. A text message followed containing coordinates for a warehouse in an industrial zone, a classic tableau for a grim transaction. The subject bypassed every conventional crisis protocol, initiating no contact with law enforcement or security personnel such as Marcus or Sarah. Instead, a primal, adrenaline-fueled instinct seized control, guiding her directly toward Adrienne's personal study. Her movements were precise, aimed at a concealed vault. "They made contact. I have an address." The conditions were unambiguous. "Arrive by yourself, or he perishes." Tears welled, but Elena suppressed them with force. "I cannot stake his survival on the response time of the authorities. I must be the one who goes." Sarah's expression transformed, a confluence of emotions solidifying into unyielding resolve. "I am contacting Marcus and initiating a trace on your phone immediately. You will proceed to that location, but you will not enter that situation without cover. They specified alone, and you will appear to be alone. But Marcus will have eyes on you. If the situation deteriorates, he will intervene." Sarah was already activating her device. "This is not a negotiation, Elena. You want to rescue him? So be it. But you will not sacrifice your own life through recklessness." There was no room for debate. Elena took her keys, her heart pounding against her ribs as she sped toward the warehouse district, a duffel bag filled with currency on the passenger seat. The destination was a derelict structure, its windows like vacant sockets, its facade a canvas of faded graffiti. Her phone vibrated. Following Marcus's guidance, she advanced toward the threshold. Within the vast, cavernous warehouse, where daylight struggled and failed against concrete walls, she saw Adrienne. He was a portrait of new injuries, bound and flanked by 3 indistinct figures. Her voice, thin and almost breaking, announced the payment. The man in charge, an individual who seemed to wear brutality as an outer garment, motioned for her to release the bag and retreat. As his subordinates varied the contents, her focus narrowed on the glint of steel pressed to Adrienne's temple. In that instant, the cold crystal of her fear underwent a violent alchemy. transmuting into the white-hot core of pure rage. This was a fealty not forged in affection, but born of profound terror, a covenant sealed within the crucible of his suffering. Here was the brutal marketplace behind the corporate veneer, an arena of terminal risk where souls were bartered. Payment verified, a subordinate stated. The commander's grin was the cold gleam of his pistol as he nodded. "Mrs. Volkov, your transaction is complete. He will be released upon our departure." But Elena stood firm. "No, he departs with me, or the funds are returned. This negotiation is not over. You will have to eliminate me as well, because I am not leaving here without him." The play was a fatal risk, a bluff that could nullify both their lives. But the mandate from her core was unyielding. The payment is delivered. We are leaving together. A flicker of cold fascination crossed his face. "You are a figure of either sublime courage or spectacular ignorance. A rare specimen." She met his stare. "The terms are absolute, both of us, or neither?" The silence stretched, turning moments into monuments. Then, a low laugh and the slow decline of a gun. "An interesting counteroffer. I believe I accept." "You possess a formidable will," he conceded, signaling for Adrian's bonds to be severed. "Take your husband. Inform him that our ledger is now closed. His next trespass will not afford a negotiation." As Elena supported Adriana's weight, each step toward freedom felt like a gamble against a final, unseen shot. They broke into the blinding light of the outside world. Marcus's vehicle appeared, and they collapsed into its sanctuary. Noting Adrian's battered state, Marcus drove for the hospital without a word. "That was madness," Adrian rasped. "You were meant to involve the authorities, not stage a one-woman intervention." "Your objection is noted." As adrenaline drained from her, a tremor took its place. "You are also hemorrhaging. Be still and allow yourself to be assessed." The medical verdict was a concussion, fractured ribs, and deep cuts, but no lasting damage. Adrian chafed under the medical attention, decrying the loss of time with a bitter fury. Elena sat by him, trapped between the impulse to comfort him and the urge to condemn him for the terror he had wrought. "Explain the abduction," she requested, shielded by the privacy of a treatment bay. "A coordinated attack, post-meeting, a flaw in my own protocol." Adrienne's fingers brushed a bandage on his head, a gesture of pain. "They are linked to an asset I neutralized 3 months ago, a move they clearly resented." "External parties often interpret your business strategies personally, a potential defect in your process." A quaver in her voice betrayed the cool analysis of her words. "Perhaps." His hand covered hers. "Your actions were reckless, they were impulsive and monumentally foolish." "I had contingencies." Sarah alerted Marcus. He tracked my phone's signal. A response unit was 2 blocks away. Her fingers clenched his, a pressure that betrayed more than words. "But I concede. The exposure was extreme, as was our marriage agreement, and that has proven functional." Functional. A strained, authentic smile touched his face. "That is perhaps the most clinical assessment of our existence I've ever heard." "Emotion is a liability. I favor a working partnership with periodic hostage crises." In the stark quiet of that hospital room, they held hands like 2 castaways clinging to a single piece of floating wreckage. Elena's thoughts returned to the contract they had nullified 2 years ago, with its sterile clause that voided their pact if emotion ever entered the equation. But love is not governed by legal precedent. It had infiltrated their lives in the daily ritual of coffee, in his recall of her tastes, in her understanding of his wordless cues. It took a year before she could even articulate the feeling to herself, and much longer before it was voiced. The word felt immense, overloaded with consequence. But in this moment, having purchased his survival, she understood that ambiguity was its own form of poison. "I love you," she said, the statement landing in the quiet room without preamble. In the event, my position during the exchange was at all ambiguous. Adrian met her gaze, his expression stripped of all artifice, revealing a vulnerability she had rarely been permitted to witness. "I am aware. I have been for some time, and I am in love with you." This was a truth that functioned as both a terror and a complication. Yet it was the singular, defining event of his existence. He drew her near, mindful of his wounds. "None of this was prearranged, but I am eternally grateful that you broke into my life and refused to depart." "My persistence is a core trait. Indeed it is, and among your most potent." They departed the hospital bearing prescriptions. Elena at the wheel while Adrienne rested. The house was unaltered from her panicked exit, but its entire psychic architecture felt remapped. They had endured what should have shattered them, and it had instead forged a connection that far outstripped their transactional origin. The ensuing months were a period of quiet fortification. Adrienne installed an impregnable security system. Elena undertook combat training, resolving never again to experience the paralysis of helplessness. They came to terms with the irreducible threat of his world, and they began, finally, to truly exist. They initiated excursions to uncharted destinations. Dinner evolved from a tactical debrief into genuine dialogue. Mornings transformed into a space for connection rather than mere operational readiness. That spring, Elena unveiled her community garden, a municipal project that converted derelict lots into flourishing oases. While Adrian supplied the financial and political leverage, the conception was entirely hers. At the inauguration, observing children play in a space she had brought into existence, Elena felt a deep sense of tranquility. This was the value she had pursued, not the sanction of her lineage, but the capacity to manifest something tangible and good. "I built this." Victoria's appearance at the opening was a jarring anomaly. Her sister seemed altered. The flawless facade remained, but a new brittleness was visible beneath it. "This is impressive," Victoria observed, her gaze surveying the garden. "The design is quite ingenious." "Thank you." Elena braced for its customary barbed comment. "I am here to apologize." The words were extracted from Victoria, each one costing her a piece of her identity. "For my words when you married Adrian, for a lifetime of casual cruelty, for my failures as a sister." Elena scanned her sister's features for the usual mask of duplicity, but saw only the ruined terrain of a soul stripped bare. "What broke you?" "Life. The burden of embodying a flawless woman is a crushing force, and its eventual collapse is catastrophic." A smile lacking any warmth grazed Victoria's lips. "I selected a husband based on all the approved criteria: wealth, influence, the metrics of success. In public, he was an exemplar. Behind closed doors, a monster. I left 6 months ago, and am now attempting to construct a self that does not subsist on applause. I regret that you endured that. Do not. The injuries were self-inflicted." Victoria's stare lingered on the children, heavy with profound longing. "I was envious of you. Even as I was exiling you, you always possessed something authentic. Something real. It filled me with terror. A dormant rage stirred within Elena. I was a pariah because you designated me as one. I know. Victoria's eyes locked with hers, direct and unflinching. And I am sorry. I have no expectation of your forgiveness. I have not earned it. But it was necessary for me to state that I perceive it now. I perceive what I did. I am trying to become someone else. Elena observed this fractured image of her sister, and a complex mechanism shifted within her. A single moment of remorse could not negate years of deliberate harm, yet to perpetuate the rage was to inhabit a different kind of prison. I am not prepared to have you in my world, Elena stated, her words carefully chosen. But coffee, perhaps. We might begin there. That is more than I possess any right to request. Victoria's smile, though fragile, was genuine. Thank you. After she departed, Adrienne found Elena at the door, observing the sky's transition to twilight. Where is your mind at this moment? He inquired, his arm encircling her waist. I am processing. Victoria's capitulation was a tactical move I never anticipated. Elena leaned back into his solid presence. I am unsure if I can forgive her, but I might be able to stop her ghost from dictating my identity. That feels more restorative than forgiveness itself. Adrienne placed a kiss on her temple. What you have built here is entirely separate from them and their judgments. This reality is your own. Elena's view swept across the garden, its intentional forms, the aesthetic she had manifested for others to experience. She then looked at Adrienne, at the life they had constructed from a 12-month agreement. For years, she had been an apparition, the unwanted daughter, the forgotten sister. She believed worth was an external grant. But standing here, connected to the man who acknowledged her when she was invisible, Elena confronted a more difficult truth. Worth was not a gift to be bestowed or a prize to be seized. The subject executed a fundamental cognitive restructuring. She concluded her value was not an artifact the catalyst's making, but an intrinsic quality he simply revealed. This new personal history neutralizes the initial power imbalance and canonizes her emotional bond. The concept of home was itself redefined, detached from her family of origin and anchored in the universe built with Adrienne. She recognized their existence 3 years past. The contract's term was infinitely more turbulent and dangerous than planned, a state she had learned to perceive as beautiful. The final frame focuses on a scene of domestic tranquility. They take a simple meal prepared by others, their exchange mundane. This act signifies her complete assimilation into their constructed reality, a life originating from a clinical pact, but now experienced as an authentic, shared existence. Adrienne's proposition to formalize their union publicly was a calculated maneuver, engineered to project an illusion of love over the framework of a contract. He articulated his goal was to demonstrate to the world that their partnership was an authentic spiritual covenant, a classic tactic aimed at appeasing Elena's profound need for validation. The warmth that ignited in her chest was a clear indicator of her deepening trauma bond, a symptom that echoed the psychology of a willing hostage. The ceremony's orchestration was precise, with roles distributed to their inner circle, Maya, Marcus, and Sarah, to solidify this carefully fabricated social narrative. The ceremony was a controlled environment, sealed off from the world to stage a perfect tableau of devotion for a curated audience. Elena's emotional detachment from her parents represents the cauterization of formative wounds, a necessary maneuver for psychic preservation. The brief presence of her sibling Victoria, registers as a minor disturbance in their protracted, dysfunctional dynamic. The rite itself, with its bespoke vows and symbolic gestures, was engineered to generate maximum perceived authenticity. When the officiant uttered the concluding words, Elena's intimate response validated her complete psychological adoption of this new persona. In the aftermath, her confidant Maya, lubricated by wine, proposed a toast that reframed Elena's high-risk maneuvers as acts of courage. This moment highlighted Elena's own internal battle to claim her own agency, a hallmark of those who have experienced deep-seated neglect. A 3-year retrospective of her trajectory shows a tectonic behavioral shift, from a peripheral figure in her family to a woman who neutralized mortal threats and constructed an empire. Her query to Adrian regarding regret was a seismic probe sent into their foundation, a subconscious test for hidden structural flaws. Adrian's response was a weapon, first twisting with manufactured fear, then delivering a meticulously scripted confession of his own profound need. This admission of squandered years and his terror functioned to bind Elena more tightly, casting her as the agent of his soul's salvation. His assertion that she made him feel alive was a classic maneuver, transferring the responsibility for his own emotional state directly onto her. Elena's mind then replayed their timeline, from the opening power play of 5 cold words to the contract's nullification 2 years later, as her psyche reconciled itself to the narrative she had chosen. Subject Elena has constructed a personal narrative in which her value was an inherent state, not a reward conferred when Adrian selected her over Victoria. She reinterprets his initial action not as predation, but as perception, a reframing that provides her a sense of control. Her declaration of having attained self-awareness is, from an objective standpoint, filtered entirely through the prism of their shared reality. Her proclamation of love, which carried a rehearsed quality, and the physical intimacy that ensued, signaled the successful culmination of her psychological realignment. Her final, fleeting thoughts of her family were the ultimate evidence. The locus of her world had shifted entirely, its only mooring now being Adrian. In another place, Victoria was assembling a self from the debris of a life founded on falsehoods. In other places, individuals were signing contracts, trying to force order onto the entropy of human relationships. But here, within the world of her own making, Elena Vulov had achieved her equilibrium, her place. This profound serenity stemmed not from external acclaim, but from a newly calibrated internal system that validated every risk she had ever undertaken. The first stars emerged, points of fire in the void, each a self-contained furnace, indifferent to any observer. For years, Elena's affliction had been a need for visibility, requiring another's gaze to exist. Yet a star does not burn for a spectator. It burns because that is its nature. The fire had always been within her. She merely had to turn from those who lacked the capacity to see it to finally perceive it herself. Then his hand claimed hers, a tangible anchor in the immense silence. They remained, sharing the quiet. Their union began as ink on a page, but what flourished between them transcended legal terminology, a covenant, a synergy, a shared claim on the world. The texture of their life defied her initial projections, yet it satisfied a deep-seated need in a way that made all calculations irrelevant. At last, Adrian whispered it was time to leave. Elena gave the garden one last survey, a vibrant testament to an existence she had forged from resolve, audacity, and the profound refusal to be a footnote. She squeezed his hand, a silent affirmation. Yes, it is time to go home.